The action developed in the province of Nan Yuan, where the prisoner Chu Yang was restrained in a dark, deep cave. The eunuch Wu appeared at his side with an imperial decree in his hands. The junior prince was officially appointed to the throne. All prisoners would be pardoned and released. The imprisoned Chu Yang would regain his status as a prince. Therefore, following heavenly and imperial decrees, Chu Yang tomorrow must be released, and he must go to Persia to get married. Wu Xiao didn't even bother to congratulate Chu Yang. After all, he was about to be executed for committing treason. Who would have thought that he would be pardoned after a year of imprisonment? Such luck was enviable, even though eunuch Wu denied that he didn't know why the prince was imprisoned. He was more than well aware that Chu Yang was not imprisoned for treason. Chu Yang, a promising prince, managed to reach the first stage of the martial arts dimension at the age of 6, went to Qingqing Mountain, where he killed 26 wolves there with his bare hands to protect the villagers. And when he was 8 years old, he advanced to the second stage of the martial arts dimension, and at that time, he destroyed 3 bandit groups, thus opening the way to the northeastern regions for the kingdom. As soon as Chu Yang was 11 years old, he discovered the third dimension stage and suppressed the rebellion in the northeastern region. It was after that he obtained the status of prince. At 14, having reached the fourth stage, the prince led the national army of Nan Yuan, besieged the capital of Persia, and forced the Shah of Persia to abdicate the throne. Could it be that after all these achievements, eunuch Wu would still feel that Chu Yang was really very lucky indeed? Chu Yang was appointed as the prince heir. Sooner or later, he would have come to power anyway. So why did he have to kill the king for the throne on a day when everyone was celebrating Chu Yang's victory? Wu Xiaoming understood everything the prince was leading to and was afraid of it, though he tried his best to show his non-involvement. Yet, even if Chu Yang was just lucky, he was still no match for Wu Xiaoming. The eunuch who had been the very first to accuse Chu Yang of the crime had been an ordinary servant, but was now living a wonderful life as the chief of the eunuchs. Under Chu Yang's onslaught, Wu Xiaoming emotionally confessed that it was all the king and second prince's fault. He wanted to continue talking, but quickly shut up, realizing that he was saying too much. Then Chu Yang had to talk to him a little bit. If he used even the slightest bit of his remaining strength, eunuch Wu would probably be dead by now. Wu Xiaofeng probably now better understood the situation he was in. Now he had to go back to the king and tell him that Chu Yang was willing to go to Persia, but under 3 conditions. The first condition was as follows. Chu Yang wanted to take his mother's favorite earring with him. Second condition. Xiaopei's maid will go with Chu Yang. Third, Chu Yang wanted his dragon spear. And if even a single hair falls from Xiaopei's head, Wu Xiaoming will not live. The prince had already had his clothes prepared in advance and wanted to present them properly. But he took the bundle with disdain and quickly put them on, and afterwards made it clear to everyone that the eunuch Wu's physique was not something he wished to see. He had to disappear. Finally, after a year of guarding, Chu Yang was able to relax in a hot bath. This was exactly what he needed, and had been unavailable all this time. During his water treatments, his favorite maid, Xiaopei, walked in on him. She hadn't expected to see a naked gentleman here, so she hurried to leave the room. But he wouldn't let her, and pulled her closer to him. Chu Yang gently hugged Xiaopei like a little sister. He could feel how she had lost weight during this time, but it didn't matter because they were happy to see each other. The girl broke away from the embrace, and remembered that she was supposed to bring the things the Lord had requested earlier from the king. Everything was in place, the spear, the earring, and Xiaopei. The king fulfilled all 3 conditions, but unfortunately there was only half of the tip left of the dragon spear. Chu Yang betrayed with his memories. He perfectly remembered the moment when his mother had given him that earring. After all, she had told him back then not to lose this earring under any circumstances. All this time, this earring, as well as the warm memory of his mother, Chu Yang kept with trepidation. But he still didn't understand why his mother was so concerned about this earring, and what was so special about it. It had never occurred to him to put on the earring before, but when he deigned to do so, a pale violet light shone in the room and spread throughout the room. This light could be seen until some time before the prince was near a tall tower. He walked into it. The first thing he saw was the chart his mother had left him. Tears began to flow from his eyes, for if he was reading this message, his mother was no longer alive. This unique earring, and the tower within it, was the last gift Mom was able to leave behind. She hoped that in the future, it could protect and train Chu Yan instead of her mother. She placed a few seals inside the earring. The mother knew in advance that her son had a long and hard road ahead of him. She was sorry, very sorry that she couldn't even support her son. Chu Yang could no longer hold back. Tears flowed down. He knew that as long as he remembered his mother, she would always be by his side. His mother had always been kind to him, and her loss in his life had left a huge mark on the young prince's soul. Parents don't last forever, he knew that. But he didn't know that he would lose his only family member so early. In the outside world, there were many dangers, where you were often willing to be framed. Therefore, Chu Yang decided to return there in a serious mood, and did not even give the appearance of being hurt somewhere. And the tower remained a kind of small shelter for him. Walking a little deeper, he went to the sound where he heard lava gurgling and felt the heat. This lava was the blood of the beast separating the ocean and the clouds. The beast blood had beneficial and medicinal properties, so without thinking for a long time, Chu Yang decided to seize the moment and dipped into it. The change of martial arts depended on the hardening of the body. It consisted of 5 stages. The first is a beginner, the second is an apprentice, the third is a fighter, the fourth is a master, and the fifth is an expert. Chu Yang managed to reach the 4th stage and became a master when he was only 14 years old, which was 4 or 5 times faster than what happened to ordinary people. But unfortunately, he had lost his cultivation and fame due to the poisoned wine, so he just wanted to die. The king, prince, and princess, they must have planned this to take away Chu Yan's title of prince. Only now Chu Yang no longer wanted to die. A thirst for life had settled in his body. He was determined to get back everything his enemies had stolen from him. Thanks to the beast blood, Chu Yan was able to return to the 1st stage of the martial arts dimension. But the energy in his body was much stronger, even than any cultivator at the 2nd stage. His mother had once told him the truth. Not only had he recovered completely, but his cultivation remained stronger than fighters of the same level. Moreover, his mother had mentioned that this tower was built especially for him. Chu Yang was now eager to see if it was suitable for him. Each floor of this pagoda was sealed. The door was probably supposed to open when our hero reached a certain level of cultivation. When the prince looked at the tower from the outside, it seemed to him that there were many more floors than 8. Although one had to take into account the 5 stages of martial arts measurement and the 3 stages of meridian formation measurement. Perhaps there were people in this world stronger than the meridian formation dimension. And maybe because the prince was in a small vassal state, he hadn't seen any real experts. Chu Yang managed to open the doors to the other floor, but when he entered, the place was empty. But what caught his attention was the time acceleration cage. It had a very useful effect if used properly. 1 day outside was equal to 3 days in the cage. If you think about it like that, cultivating in this cage, Chu Yan's progress would be 3 times faster than others under normal circumstances. He was in no hurry to enter the cage. He decided to check the 3rd floor some more, but the seal wouldn't budge. Chu Yan had absorbed some of the blood of the beast that separated the ocean and the clouds, so even now his body was recovering and rebuilding. With the help of the cage and time acceleration, one could believe that he would quickly be able to open this door. But it was impossible to stay in the tower for long, so Chu Yan hurriedly got out. And now that he had such an herringbone, he couldn't afford to lose her and wanted to start cultivation from today. For now, let's look at what was being done in the capital of the vassal state of Nan Yuan. Right under the moon, the prince was practicing his handwriting. He was eerily curious if his handwriting was better than Chu Yan's in the master's opinion. The master noticed that the young man had many twists and turns, and that yin dominated over yang. The master had speculated so often about the prince's plans that perhaps he could just say he had evil intentions. In passing words, the prince decided to remind the master that he was the prince's heir and resided in the Eastern Palace, and he was the one who had received the gift. And Chu Yang, in his opinion, had to die, no matter how, under any circumstances. The young prince was in control. The marriage between Chu Yang and Princess Persia was not for nothing. The princess herself had wanted it, and the prince kept puzzling over why she had chosen him out of all of them. Master was really worried about Chan heir. After all, he did not know if she would interfere with his plans, but he believed that the princess would not help Chu Yang. The prince had his own plans. He was counting on the fact that Chu Yang could still die on the way to Persia, and in that case, he would definitely not give him any trouble. And with the master supporting him, the young prince felt confident in his plan. The prince couldn't wait to fulfill his plans after all. He and Chu Yan were on different levels. Chu Yang was an ordinary gifted martial artist, and could in no way compare to the innate ability of the demonic python prince. Chu Yang and Xiaoe were already riding in a carriage outside of Nan Yuan capital. The master noticed how the girl was bored and looked sadly at one point. as if she was doomed for something. Then Chu Yang did not hesitate to ask. Perhaps Xiaoe did not want to go with him? The girl immediately turned on and nervously began to object. She was her master's servant and wanted to accompany him wherever he went at all times. It was about something else. Xiaoe was stifled by all the injustice. After all, it was not her master's fault that they were doing this to him now. But the Lord promised that they would definitely come back here, and then the Lord would wipe this place off the face of the earth. The carriage was stopped. There was some message from Mr. Chu from the palace. Chu Yan had already guessed that it was a message from Chan Er. The servant was just glad that he had time to pass it on. Sister didn't forget to see her big brother off after all, Chu Yan remembered that. But the servant also relayed his sister's words that this sword was exclusively for Chu Yang. Brother, of course, accepted his sister's gift and ordered the servant to return. Chu Yang, noticing that his sister was standing nearby, watching him, shouted to her, but as if sending a message to the servant, that if she were to do so again from now on, if she even came within 10 miles of him, he would undoubtedly cut off her head. These words didn't make her feel sad much, after all. They had such a relationship. But despite the position Chu Yang was in, he allowed himself to threaten Chan Er. Still, the girl was glad that he had accepted Qinggang's sword. He probably still cared for her. The road continued, but there was no time to waste. Chu Yan returned to the tower and decided to start cultivating in the time acceleration cage. It did have a significant effect. Chu Yang had reached the second stage of the martial arts dimension, but now it was time to check what was on the third floor after all. When the seal opened, the first thing the prince found was a book dedicated to the Raging Dragon Capture combat technique. Having a second-level martial artist, it was not necessary to read a book like this to internalize it. After all, it was internalized with the help of martial arts that had already been gained. It was as if the text itself was trying to fit into Chu Yan's subconsciousness. He could clearly understand how to use the technique and all its nuances. This practice was much more effective than mere rote learning. It became fixed in Chu Yan's mind, and yet he didn't even have to spend time studying it. But that didn't mean one could relax. On the contrary, the prince wanted to train even harder. After another 2 months passed, Chu Yang had reached the highest level of the second stage of the martial arts dimension. Now the goal was the third stage, and he wanted to reach it when he arrived in Persia. Xiaoe relayed the commander's words that they were about 20 miles away from the rendezvous point. But it was in neutral territory, and yet, the commander asked for caution. The guards let their guard down a bit, but they noticed the two strangers approaching them in fairly good time. These guys named Gu Hong and Duo Huo did not hesitate to introduce themselves and explained why they were here. No, they weren't just passers-by. They were here for Chu Yang of Nan Yuan's head. Chu Yang immediately guessed that Chu Xing probably couldn't calm down and continued his futile attempts to kill him. This was purely his and his brother's fight, and he didn't want to drag others into it, so he offered them to leave if they wanted to. But the mercenaries instead decided that no one would leave this place alive. Gu Hong no longer continued to chatter, and thanks to his weapon, he was able to repel several guards at once and disarm them as well. The prince and the maid stood back. The girl was shaking with fear. She was not used to seeing such violence. Chu Yang had promised that he would protect her, so she could be unafraid. The guards were dead, and someone was simply unconscious. Guo Hong immediately turned his attention to the target. He was so generous that he even allowed these two people to choose their deaths. Guo Hong was aware from the prince's successor that Chu Yang had been poisoned, which meant that he had neither strength nor cultivation. Therefore, the mercenary was very curious to see how Chu Yang was going to protect the girl. Without a second thought, our hero headed towards the mercenary, preparing to strike him. Guo Hong was so carefree and confident in his strength that he failed to appreciate his opponent at face value. So now he didn't even have time to defend himself. The prince's punch was strong enough for that fatty to collapse on the ground and still rolling. It was a surprise to him that Chu Yang was able to recover a bit. Well, of course it didn't matter to him because he was getting ready to break the prince's arms. But will he have the strength to do it? What will he be able to counter the Raging Dragon's technique? Nothing at all. Guo Hong was dead, but Duo Hong was still alive. No one would have guessed that Chu Yang would once again be able to advance to the second stage of the martial arts dimension in such a short time. However, unlike Guo Hong, Duo Hong was not at the third dimension stage. Duo was even sure that he could surpass the prince when he was at his best. And now he was already in stage 4. Their swords clashed in a duel. It was not for nothing that Chan Er arrived in time to hand her brother the sword. Not even a normal strike occurred as Duo Hong noticed a crack on his weapon. No one would have thought that Chu Yang would have such an amazing weapon stashed away. This sword was truly amazing. Qinggong was not a mere iron, but a magical weapon that was at the 6th level. Chu Yang took the mercenaries by surprise, as everyone expected him to be a powerless and cowardly boy. But nevertheless, the mercenary did not want to give up the task, and decided to show the victim the difference between the 2nd and 4th stage of the martial arts dimension. What a pity that a foolish mercenary like Duo Hong didn't even know how to distinguish between stages. After all, Chu Yang did not have the 2nd stage, but the 3rd stage. When did this happen? Chu Yang was really talented, managing to advance to a higher stage right during the fight. It was a pity the mercenary didn't follow him. Now he had to deal with the consequences of his carelessness and thoughtlessness. The enemy's sword was once again giving cracks in its thin metal. Duo Hong was losing his former confidence. He was losing his weapons and losing control of the situation. The prince stripped the mercenary of his arm. He was about to die, but before that, he had finally decided for himself that he would send Chu Yang to hell at the cost of his life. Things were bad for our hero, for the mercenary had the elemental talisman and it would take effort to stop this guy. The talisman didn't hit Chu Yang but Xiaoe, who was basically out of the battle. In time, the girl managed to bounce away and stay alive. But that was just the beginning. The enemy kept attacking from behind, and then the girl decided on a desperate act. Xiaoe covered her master with her body, sacrificing her life. What an innocent death. The girl was dying in the arms of her lord, and he could do nothing to help her, even though he had recently said he would protect her. Duo Hong was still alive for that matter, and so was Chu Yang. The prince simply couldn't die from something like this. Duo Hong still wasn't going to stop. He had an explosive pill that had a very strong effect, to prevent a terrible outcome right into the heart of a mercenary. But unfortunately, it was already really late, and the pill had already begun its effects. Duo Hong wanted Chu Yang to go to hell with him. Not far from the site of the massacre, residents of the area were walking. They had heard the sounds of fighting for a long time. But now that they heard the explosion, they were finally convinced that it was indeed a fight. Upon reaching that evil clearing, the people found that the prince was still alive. The woman noticed that it was just a duel between martial artists, and the spiritual energy was probably caused by the talisman. They were about to leave when they realized there was nothing noteworthy here. But the boy discovered the girl and caught the older sister's eye. The boy couldn't wait to find out if this girl had this. Chu Yan was still conscious, something he barely managed to utter, for people to save this girl. The woman inquired who she was to the lad. Then the prince once again had to strain to explain that she was his maid. By it, the boy had previously mentioned a type, and Xiaoe had it as a wood type. The woman never thought that they would be able to meet someone with an arboreal type body. If they didn't find her, she might die here, in which case they would lose an amazing talent. Then the elder sister decided that she would take this girl with her. For some reason she was sure that the master would take her as an apprentice. But what will the travelers do to Chu Yan? The boy was already thinking that they should kill this guy to keep this girl's talent a secret. But the power of Luoxia Valley did not extend to this area. Nothing good would happen if they started killing people here. Therefore, Chu Yang had decided to be left to his fate. The heavens had to decide what would become of him. In the meantime, Chu Yang had managed to sneak into the 4th floor of the Nirvana Tower. The great spiritual technique served as a great way to restore the body and soul. As long as there was spiritual chi energy in the universe, from a small bush to a rock, this technique would accumulate it and absorb it, strengthening the body. The travelers continued to roam the clearing, but this time different ones. Feng Ru and Zhao wandered through the forest and discussed the recent events. They were unhappy because they had failed to protect their young master. He was dead. What could they do now? Zhao suddenly stopped, for he smelled the scent of blood. In a sunny clearing they saw a heap of corpses and blood, and among them a young prince. Hope flashed in their eyes, for they had seen their master. The mood instantly changed when they saw that the master was still alive. But Feng Ru still couldn't understand what Zhao was marveling at. Finally, as he began to look closer at his facial features, his chin, his hair, hunches began to occur to him. The final proof was the portrait of Chu Yang himself. The boy who had lost all hope was finally able to verify that it was indeed Prince Chu Yang. Apparently heaven didn't want them dead, and there was still hope to save the prince and not get caught in the hot hand themselves. But before helping Chu Yang, Zhao once again had to explain to Feng Ru that they would not disguise this guy and substitute him as a prince, and that this was the prince. And yet after 2 bruises, it came to the young man. The guys found the prince very timely, for he was alive and his wounds could be healed. But now the fate of Zhao and Feng Ru was in Chu Yang's hands. This was something they had to talk about when he woke up. The prince smelled meat. When the boys noticed that he had awakened, they immediately treated him to a piece of their prey. Chu Yang was as hungry as if he hadn't eaten for a whole year, and quite quickly he devoured the first bite. Then the guys gave him a refill. Now his health and wellness was more important to them than anything else. Finally, when Chu Yang regained consciousness, he began to remember that when he had lost consciousness, he had somehow gotten into the Nirvana Tower and was able to learn the spiritual absorption technique. As the boys watched the prince, they began to wonder if he was really a prince. After all, looking at his appetite, he could have been exiled to a common tramp. Even Xiaoe himself was beginning to doubt it. Feng Rou couldn't even hold back tears after all. This was all their food for the week. But there was nothing to be done about it. Feng Rou, as the youngest, had to leave and look for new food for the prince. When Chu Yang finally had enough to eat, he stood up and introduced himself by his name, thanked his brothers, and promised that he would never forget their kindness towards him. Xiaoe decided to find out, after all. Was Chu Yang pretending to be that prince, or was he really a prince? Was Yang conditional in his name? Actually, Chu Yang himself did not fully understand what was going on, or perhaps they were looking for someone else. Zhaoji decided to change the subject, introduced himself, and introduced his friend Feng Rou. They were supposedly passing by when they saw the prince here lying unconscious and just helped. Chu Yan also had to explain that he and his entourage were attacked by martial artists. Zhaozi decided to clarify if they were just fighters, but such clarification caused Chu Yang to question, why would he, a mere passerby, go into details? The one explained that where Chu Yang was found, they had discovered the remnants of spiritual qi, and ordinary fighters were not capable of such a thing. Zhaoji must have had a fifth-stage martial arts dimension. Chu Yang had to explain that the assassins had used the talisman to kill him, and afterward, spiritual qi was summoned, and the yang in his name was unconditional. When the answer was heard, Zhaozi instantly became more good-natured and confessed that he had slandered Chu Yang for nothing. However, he was not exactly the right name for them and was not the person they were looking for. It would be possible to change the subject here, but Chu Yang continued to wonder. What was this spiritual qi that Zhaozi had mentioned? The power of fighters depended on their strength, but once a fighter reached the meridian formation dimension, he could use spiritual qi to defend against attacks. It was then that a fighter could be called a cultivator. And being victimized by martial arts fighters and cultivators were very different things. Chu Yang also had to explain that he didn't piss anyone off. It was just an internal family squabble and a manhunt was on. When Zhaozi more or less understood the situation, he sped up and moved closer to the matter at hand, for he was in a hurry. He and Feng Rou needed Chu Yan's help. Since the guys had saved him, Chu Yan of course immediately responded, and was willing to help. Of course, not only because of that, but also because if he didn't agree, it was quite possible that he might have been killed. Zhaozi, as if sensing this, explained to the prince that he shouldn't have worried. Oh, and besides, what the guys were going to ask for wouldn't harm Chu Yang himself. He would even be able to benefit from it, and perhaps be able to take revenge on his family members. Chu Yang had a poor understanding of what this matter could be, but he continued to listen. At that time, he was handed a package with his own portrait by Zhaoji. His family's future master is Chu Yang, but he has a conditional Yang. Initially, the guys were supposed to accompany him for the marriage, but there was an accident that killed him, and because they screwed up, the head of the family will probably kill them. And now apparently Zhaoji was offering Chu Yang to become their young master, scholar, and infiltrate the Lin family. But what was the benefit to Chu Yang in this matter? Zhaozi suggested that some details should be left out, because first of all, their young lady was an incredible beauty. Almost all the men wanted to marry her. Furthermore, there was a chance that Chu Yang could join the Xuanyue sect and become a cultivator. The people who had taken Xiaoe away were probably members of the Great Sect, and if our hero joined such a community, he would be able to find a girl. Such conditions favored excellent prospects, and of course Chu Yang agreed. But of course, he must keep it all a secret. Before going any further, Chu Yang decided to clarify, what exactly was the family Lin Zhaozi had mentioned earlier? Zhaoji laughed heartily, for he had completely forgotten to tell that he and Feng Rou were subjects of the Lin family, in the country of Yunao. Chu Yang literally had his breath taken away when he heard the name of this state. Of all the nearby kingdoms, Nan Yuan was the smallest. It seemed especially small when compared to the Jiang kingdom. These two states were on completely different levels, and the prospect of being in the kingdom of Jiang, which is many times more advanced than Nan Yuan, intrigued our hero, so it was easy for the boys to negotiate with the prince. From this moment on, Feng Rou and Zhaozi were at Chu Yang's disposal. for they were now in the same boat. Chu Yang did not even give in to this discussion. From this moment on, he recognized himself as the future son-in-law of the Lin clan. The journey to the Lin mansion was supposed to take 4 months, and in that time, the guys promised to tell the prince everything he needed to know. Chu Yang had already met with the clan leader. It was implied that the other Chu Yang had met. Right now, they needed to work on the prince's appearance. Chu Yang instinctively thought that they would be able to change it with cultivation. But before they started to change anything, Chu Yang asked if the guys had seen his sword, which was about 3 feet long. Qinggong's sword was nowhere to be found, but Chu Yang decided not to give the appearance that it was important to him. However, Zhao Zi decided to cheer him up by saying that once he got into the sect, he would be able to choose any of the great swords. The prince was sorry to lose such a gift, but there was no time now to think and regret what could not be undone. He had to move on. It was extremely interesting for Chu Yang to play the role of the son-in-law, as he wasn't even told anything by his kin about the dangers and trials that lay ahead of him. Even if they were deadly dangers, Chu Yang was not going to give up in the face of them. After all, he always got what he wanted. The month of July had arrived. Zhao Zi, Feng Ru, and Chu Yang had managed to reach Changqing City during this time. Before visiting the mansion, Zhao had something he wanted to talk about. The Lin clan was one of the richest and strongest families in the city. The entire clan had huge reserves of gold, silver, bronze, and cloth to sell. It was discovered that Madame possessed a pure jade-type body, perfect for cultivation. Thanks to her talent, she had reached the 4th stage. Considering the few months of the guy's absence, the mistress must have already been at the 5th stage. Thanks to her, Zhao and Feng Ru were known throughout the entire city. But Madame was not a star cultivator. Neither Feng Ru at the 4th stage, nor Zhao Zi at the 5th stage, could call themselves the best. The elders were the strongest in the clan. They had managed to reach the meridian formation dimension. Therefore, they were quite strong. But Chu Yang was eager to test how powerful this Lin clan was. In general, Feng Ru and Zhao Zi recommended that the prince not to worry about it. After all, he was a future young master, and the clan would not do anything bad to him. The man who approached kept watching the travelers, taking a closer look and wondering if they were 2 dogs from the Lin clan. The boys took no offense at being addressed in this way, for it was Lin the caretaker. Feng Ru sincerely inquired what brought the caretaker here, but he was still sarcastic. He didn't have to report to him. The young man was just concerned about the caretaker, but the latter was more interested in the newcomer to their company. Zhao Zi hurriedly introduced the young master that the leader himself had ordered to bring in. But the caretaker was extremely pleased that a scumbag like Chu Yang would become their young master. Therefore, he chased him and Zhao Zi away with Feng Ru. The Lin clan did not welcome them. Just what it all meant, no one could understand if there was a leader waiting for them. Zhao Zi was incredibly angry after all. They had come all this way to do so much, and now they were not allowed in. But despite his anger, he continued to keep the beat. The caretaker looked very bored, because who would have thought where they had even dug up that jerk? The real young master was already sitting in the main hall, proposing to the mistress. What other young master could it be? Zhao Ziyan immediately began to replay the death of the real Chu Yang. After all, he and Feng Ru had witnessed it. But where did the new young master come from? The caretaker decided to continue. He was finding that the other young master was a more suitable option for the mistress. He was a genius from the Ye clan Ye Chen. He was the future young master Lin. Now Zhao Zi was beginning to realize who the conversation was even about. But in any case, Zhao Zi and Feng Ru had received orders from the clan leader. Why couldn't they enter to at least report back? Fatty really disliked that Zhao was using the clan leader's name to ignore him, but Zhao would never dare. Yet the clan leader was now cultivating in seclusion, trying to break through to the 2nd stage of the meridian formation dimension. The 2nd stage of the meridian formation measurement was very important to the Lin clan. If the leader succeeded, they would surpass the Yi clan and become the strongest in the city. Therefore, to improve relations with the Yi clan, the deputy leader was now managing the affairs of the Lin clan. Feng Rao could hardly believe the veracity of what was happening, but the caretaker was completely serious. The Ye clan was strong and famous, so if the Lin clan could unite with them through marriage, both clans would become stronger. Because of this, the deputy clan leader ordered the caretaker to close the entrance to the area. Don't let anyone in who isn't involved in this wedding, especially assholes who are trying to ignore the current situation. Feng Ru was angry and was already ready to vent his emotions. But Zhao Zi was wiser and warned that they would just wait here until the leader came out of the cultivation process. At these words, Look only laughed. After all, he did say he wouldn't let the guys inside, but he didn't say he'd let them leave. What did it mean? What it meant was this. The deputy clan leader gave an order that had to be obeyed while the Ye clan was here to organize the wedding. If any suspicious individuals show up and try to disrupt the family reunion, the guards must capture them. Especially if someone claimed that they wanted to become a future master of the Lin clan. The keeper immediately ordered the guards to grab and break the jaw of their new guests. Feng Rou and Zhao Zi continued to fulfill the leader's will and protected the prince at all costs. These guys were ordinary subjects of the Lin clan. The overseer was surprised that, being in such a position, they tried to resist. Zhao Zi understood the situation perfectly. They really couldn't go against the Lin clan's order. But if they captured this guy, there was a chance that he would reveal their plan. Zhao Zi already wanted to turn to the said prince to say something, but he jumped away. Feng Rou and Zhao Zi couldn't afford to hit the caretaker, but Chu Yang didn't deny himself the pleasure. The poor caretaker couldn't even do anything, so what did he think he was doing? Since when did he decide to give orders to break the prince's jaw? This prince could have burned the caretaker, but he got by with one blow. Whether the poor man would survive or not is unknown. Chu Yang had seemed so harmless to the guys accompanying him all this time, but in an instant, he gave out such a thing. It was both impressive, but also seemed insane. How could he have the guts to hit a Lin keeper? And what would be the consequences? The guard was already afraid that the prince would attack him as well, so he prepared to defend himself with a trembling hand. But Chu Yang passed by. He didn't need any unnecessary sacrifices. Although Feng Rou somehow expected him to want to escape, Chu Yang, on the other hand, was walking towards the Lin clan. He had knocked out the caretaker, so there was nothing stopping them anymore. Zhao Zi got a headache from this guy, and Feng Rou noted that Chu Yang had a temper. In any case, the prince had knocked out the caretaker, and now they could safely go and report back to the leader. There were of course more people in the mansion, for the mansion itself was very large and needed protection. It could be said that this was the largest house in the city, for this was where the Lin clan's stronghold lived. Chu Yang stood on the threshold and loudly, with all his might, he began to shout that he, Chu Yang of Nan Yuan, appeared here to propose to the young Ling mistress. He warned everyone, and then followed inwards. Behind Chu Yang, Zhao and Feng Rou were completely out of time and didn't understand what this madman was even doing. People were also shocked, not realizing who this person was, and was it really Chu Yang? Without hesitation, he walked to the main door that housed the Hall of Ya. The hall, as expected, housed the chapters. Among them was the leader of the Lin clan, Lin Chongtian. It was too fast for him to finish his cultivation if the ranger hadn't lied about it. The guys were finally able to make their way quickly to the main hall. Still out of breath, they began apologizing for their charge to the lord. The man sitting next to Chongtian was displeased and was waiting for an explanation. Who was it that showed up? The head was going to have a difficult conversation. Zhao Zi didn't even manage to hide his surprise when he saw this man. He was one of the elders of the Ye clan, Ye Henkon, the most mysterious elder on the Yu clan who had reached the Meridian Formation dimension. It was rumored that this guy was able to kill 1,000 people in a single battle. The Lin clan's deputy also rushed into the hall. He was extremely dissatisfied with Zhao Zi and Feng Rou's performance. Zhao Zi hurriedly kneeled down and apologized. They were willing to accept any punishment for it. Feng Chongji didn't hesitate to yell at his underlings from the bottom of his throat, even considering that here was a guest and the clan leader himself. Yeo Hyunkon even had to plug his ears a little to keep from being deafened by the deputy's shouting. He was angry for a reason, for Feng Rou and Zhao Zi, along with this prince, had embarrassed them. "I'll have the guards here at once." Without thinking for a second, Feng Chongji immediately ordered Zhao Zi and Feng Rou to be captured. But Lin Chongyun didn't allow this to happen. He had his own plans. Lin Chongtian was well aware that Chu Yang was in front of him, so he decided to ask if Chu Yang had admitted his guilt. But what guilt could there be talk of? The Lin clan had broken their word, wanted to marry their daughter with 2 families, and now Lin Chong dared to ask if Prince Chu had admitted his guilt. Feng Rou and Zhao Zi could already feel the punishment they were about to receive with their whole bodies. It wasn't them who were talking nonsense, it was Chu Yang, but they were responsible for him. This Chu Yang originally seemed like a nice and humble guy when they interacted, but his tongue was like a sharp blade, and at this rate, he could send them all to hell. It was as if the leader had expected such an answer, and showed it to his guest as if to confirm his earlier words. It wasn't because he didn't want to unite Lin and Ye's families. Yeo Hyung Kong caused Lin Cheng problems. Chu Yang came here for justice, and if there's a rumor that Lin Chong wants to marry his daughter to 2 different guys, then how will they be able to stay safely in Chongqing City? Zhao Zi knew very well that the clan leader had a nasty temper, but how could he restrain himself this time? After all, he hadn't even punished him with Feng Rou. The man began to speculate that perhaps Chu Yang had guessed what the leader was planning. But if he guessed everything, then the fact that he knocked out the caretaker, made a scene at the entrance, and then broke off, was that really all done on purpose? How could he have predicted all this? If this was all really true, who was this guy really? If the word had already been given to Chu Yan, it would not be easy for the Lin family since this marriage was important to the Yo and Lin clans. Yo Hyung could only hope that Lin Chong would make a wise decision on this problem. It wasn't easy to find the perfect way out of this situation. Yu Hyun must have heard about the engagement. The engagement was arranged by Lin Chong's father. He was now cultivating in isolation, trying to break through to the second stage of the meridian formation dimension. Lin Chong was sure that his father would come out of isolation in a few days. And if he found out that the Lin clan wanted to extradite Madame twice, it would bring them shame and suffering. Yeo Hyung was extremely surprised that this old man had managed to approach the second stage. But he didn't comment on it in any way. It wasn't about that. Yet Lin Chong had also heard that Ye Chen was quite a gifted guy. Of course, it would be nice to merge the two clans, but it would make life very difficult for Lin Chong. Yeo Hyung laughed lightheartedly, promising that everything would be fine since he already had a solution. Well, no wonder Yeo Hyung belonged to the elite of the Yo clan. He was able to find a solution to the problem so quickly. Lin Chong was intrigued. Yo Hen began to speak from afar. Both clans were strong in martial arts, and Miao Ran was quite a gifted girl, so her partner should also be good at martial arts. Only then could someone be the right match for her. But if Miao Ran's partner was weaker than her, she wouldn't like it anyway. For a long time now, a cloaked figure had been standing here, and only now did Yo Hyun summon him closer. Lin Chong hadn't even paid attention to him before, and now he was wondering who it could be. The figure in the cloak was Yo Hyung's nephew, Yo Chen. Only now was Lin Chong able to see him. Yo Hyun's solution was for Yo Chen and Chu Yang to fight in a duel. Then they could find out who was the stronger of the two. But what if Chu Yang didn't possess martial arts? Didn't it look like humiliation on the part of the Lin clan when they wanted to put him against a Qing? Feng Zhong hurriedly reassured his elder brother. After all, people had already seen Chu Yang fight earlier. Lin Chong doubted that Chu Yang had knocked out someone without martial arts, but nevertheless, he was very angry at the fact that he had attacked caretaker Lin. If he really did it, then what would Chu Yang say in his defense? Chu Yang did not deny these facts, admitted his misconduct, and was willing to accept any punishment for it. In that case, Chu Yang's punishment was to duel with Ye Cheng. If he won, he could marry Miao Ran, but if he lost, he would have to retreat and never set foot in Changqing City again. The same was true for Ye Chen. If he won, he would marry Miao Ran. If he lost, he had to leave. Everyone was happy with those conditions, so that's what they decided to do. Right away, Lin Chong invited everyone to the arena where the fight would take place. Ye Chen didn't even know what martial arts skills Chu Yang possessed, but for some reason, he had the confidence that he could beat the crap out of him. Chu Yan in turn was very curious to see how he would do it. A small number of people had gathered at the arena, guards, gawkers who served for the benefit of the Lin clan, and the heads themselves. Zhao Zi and Feng Rou continued to anticipate their end, for if their ward was revealed before they were killed, they would be annihilated. They would not live to see tomorrow. Lin Chong decided not to explain the rules at length. The fighters just had to stop before they seriously hurt their opponent. Ye Chen looked very confident, or at least he tried to appear so, while Chu Yan tried not to throw around unnecessary speeches and was calm. Why was he so confident of his victory? Probably because he thought he was the most gifted man in the region. When he undressed, one could already see the power sparking out of his body. This person was at the third stage of the martial arts dimension. At this age, the young man had managed to reach the third stage. Yi Heng was pleased that the head saw how strong his nephew was. Ye Chen was already preparing to attack his opponent without stopping to utter bombastic speeches, and Chu Yang still couldn't wait for his opponent to fulfill his promises. The fight is on. The guys attacked each other like tigers from different cages. Their contest was truly powerful. The energy of this fight was felt by everyone watching, but Chu Yang didn't want to have this fight for long, so he decided to test out a new technique from the book of the Raging Dragon technique. Apply the Raging Dragon grip. Ye Chen no longer looked as confident as before. Something made him confused. Chu Yang knew all the techniques from that book as well, so he acted lightning fast and didn't even give his opponent a chance to defend himself. Ye Chen flew away for a long distance, and Chu Yang continued to attack him while still in flight. This was not the outcome his uncle had expected from his nephew. Lin Chong immediately ended the fight. Ye Chen was seriously hurt, and Chu Yang thanked him for the fight. He wasn't going to finish him off. There was no point. Ye Hyun immediately rushed over to his nephew. He was very worried if he was okay. Lin Chong began to realize that Chu Yang was not as simple as he might seem. With one strike, he finished off Ye Chen, who was at the third stage. Feng Ru and Zhao Zi already thought that they were in some kind of dream. How could it be that this kid had defeated Ye Chen, the genius of Changqing City, with just one punch? The only one who was unhappy with this fight was Ye Hen himself. In his opinion, it was too much. But weren't they supposed to put their best foot forward? Or did Chu Yang misunderstand something? But even so, Chu Yang had gotten used to the fact that things weren't always fair in life. Ye Heng was so angry that his nephew had been crippled that he began to demand Chu Yang to fight him right now. He was curious to see how long Chu Yang could last against him. This power that emanated from Ye Hyun, Chu Yang couldn't confuse it with anything, for that was the power of a meridian formation measurement cultivator. Chu Yang was already excited to see what a cultivator was capable of, but he won't see it for now, for Lin Chong has come to his defense. Ye Heng had to stop right in front of Lin Chong's face. He clearly didn't expect the leader to stand up for the boy. Was he really protecting him on purpose? Lin Chong reminded that there were more important things to do. Ye Chen's wounds needed to be examined. But the Lin clan immediately warned that they would not be responsible for him if anything serious happened. Yi Heng believed that this was not the end. He was going to report this situation to the elders of the Ye clan, while Lin Chong thought that they would be able to understand him. Lin Chong ordered the guards to take Ye Chen to the doctor, while Ye Hyun said he didn't need to. Lastly, Ye Hyun threatened the prince that one day he would answer for what he had done. Chu Yang didn't have time to respond to him, as he had already been summoned by Lin Chong. Zhao Zi still couldn't recover. Everything that was happening still seemed like a dream to him. How could it be that Ye Chen was unable to even manage to land a single blow on Chu Yang? Who was this Chu Yang? And the clan leader came out and protected him. Probably, if he really wanted to unite with the Yeo clan, he would probably let Ye Hen Kong finish off Chu Yan. Now, it was no wonder that Lin Chong Tian wanted to marry off Madame specifically to Chu Yang. Although they had heard earlier that Chu Yang was just a lowlife. Why did they get such incorrect information about him? Everyone was curious about the reason for all this, but whether they would be able to understand it in time. In that case, if Chu Yang was strong enough, then why did he even need this marriage? The servants assumed that it wasn't as simple as they thought. Or maybe it meant an additional place of the Huang Yue sect. It was pointless to make theories after all. There had to be a reason for all of this. Zhao Zi thought that the easiest thing to do was to ask Chu Yan the truth. Many people wanted to know what the clan leader was even up to. Lin Chong didn't particularly want anything from Chu Yang, just to socialize and take a closer look at him. In addition, now following the clan's traditions, Chu Yang could call Lin Chong Pulling as Uncle Lin. This kind of treatment our hero only liked, so he didn't mind. Lin Chong looked closely at Chu Yang. For some reason he felt that he was behaving completely differently from the drawing. But he decided not to show any signs and simply asked if he was tired from the road. Chu Yan, in turn, hoped that Uncle Lin had not figured them out. Therefore, he continued to talk, saying that Zhao Zi and Feng Ru were very kind to him. Lin Chong was worried that Chu Yang had injured Ye Chen, thus putting Uncle Lin in a difficult position. If the situation escalated, the Ye clan would start a war against the Lin clan. Chu Yang felt funny, after all. They had stabbed this situation, and now he was being made to feel guilty. But for the sake of propriety, he said that he was willing to accept the punishment, except that Chu Yang was not a member of the Lin clan. Therefore, it would be unfair for Uncle to punish his future son-in-law. In the end, Lin Chong had to admit that he wanted to talk to Chu Yan about someone. It was about Miao Ran. She's gone. Chu Yang's eyes expressed undisguised surprise for such a long time. What did it mean that she had left? Out of life, or had she run away? Uncle Lin repeated what he had said again. He was truly sorry that this had happened, but apparently there was nothing he could do about it. Chu Yang was willing to help and wanted to find out what had happened after all. Miao Ran was still in Changqing City and hadn't gone far away, so Lin Chong could keep an eye on her. Madam didn't want to get married until her grandfather came out of isolation. Therefore, Chu Yang had to stay as a guest, which Lin Chong apologized for. But once his father came out of isolation, then they could organize everything. It was now clear what the matter was and why the clan leader was so indecisive. And judging from his words, Lin Chong didn't want Chu Yang to leave this place. Besides, Uncle Lin had promised that he would take care of Chu Yan while he was here. Lin Chong really wanted the young prince to stay here. What was the leader up to? Fortunately, Chu Yang was just a doppelganger, and he didn't need this wedding at all. Probably, if the real Chu Yang heard this, he would have attended angrily. Chu Yan hadn't left yet as Lin Chong remembered something, for he had something for his son-in-law. This was a gift for him. Lin Chong had specially escorted him to the Lin clan's vault. The uncle had specially prepared 2 gifts for his future son-in-law, and hoped he would like them. The first gift was a book of yin blood techniques, but Uncle Lin warned the young man not to use the technique unnecessarily. The technique in question was a mid-range E-level technique. No wonder his uncle didn't want him to use it for nothing. Maybe Lin Chong wanted to use this as an apology. But no matter, he couldn't get married. But he was lucky enough to get a new technique. Someone began to address Chu Yan in a whisper. The prince had to turn around and saw his new acquaintances. Feng Ruo and Zhao were worried about their ward, and so they came here to find out what was wrong with him. They kept making theories and wondering what was even going on here. But when they got bored and had time, they found Chu Yang. The prince didn't fully understand what the guys wanted, so Zhao spoke straightforwardly. He wanted to know how the young man was able to understand what the clan leader was planning. Chu Yang didn't even try to hide anything. He explained that he realized everything when he first entered the city. The Ling clan and the Yo clan are the strongest families in Chongqing City. Why did the clan leader cancel the wedding with the Yo clan for someone he didn't even know? There were actually reasons for everything, and right now Chu Yang wanted to explain them. Zhao was so worried about this situation that he could no longer hold back and be as cold-blooded as he seemed to be before. As soon as Chu Yang entered the city, he already knew that the Ye clan and the Lin clan would never want to unite. At the very least, the clan leaders did not want to do so. The 2 clans, Lin and Ye, were both well known in the city, so this would be an important event for the city. But when Chu Yang entered the city, he saw that everyone was nervous and scared. The atmosphere was tense. The Lin clan's guards were on alert, as if something was about to happen, which meant that the Lin clan's clan leader and elder didn't want anyone to know about it. Everything seemed to make sense, but Zhao still didn't understand how Chu Yang knew that this was the clan head's idea. Chu Yang decided to remind about the caretaker. Feng Rou didn't fully understand what the caretaker had to do with this at first. But then, he had his own guesses, and he was probably right. The caretaker kept mentioning the deputy clan leader, and they knew what the deputy wanted. He didn't want any outsider to know that they wanted to give up on marrying the Ye clan. And these were all the reasons why Chu Yang wanted to help the Lin clan get out of this situation. Chu Yang had helped the Lin clan get rid of this offer from the Yo clan beforehand, and now all the blame fell solely on Chu Yang. That's why the clan leader didn't punish him. Chu Yang was angry as soon as he entered the city, but he was still able to pay attention to all these details. Feng Rou found it hard to believe that he was the exact Chu Yang they had previously rescued. Feng Rou and Zhao were so angry that they couldn't think soberly, while Chu Yang managed to keep his composure and remember all the details and clues, and then analyze them. And now, the guys realized how poorly they knew Chu Yang. Zhao couldn't even tell if they had done the right thing when they took this guy with them, but it was too late to think about it. Ye Chen was the star of the younger generation of the Ye clan, and Chu Yang had injured him. It was unlikely that Chu Yang would get away with it, but was there justice and kindness in this world? Still, if Chu Yang wanted to get his place in the Huang sect, he still had to sacrifice something to get it. And about the Lin clan, Chu Yang was willing to take the blame, because this way he could make a good impression. In addition, he was able to receive 2 gifts from Uncle Lin because of this. Chu Yang only wanted to join the sect and didn't need anything more from the Lin clan. Zhao decided to take the prince at his word, but warned that if he harmed the Lin clan in any way, then let him not blame them for being cruel to him later. Chu Yan remembered all the kindness they had shown him, so he had no intention of crossing them. Feng Rou and Zhao had learned everything they wanted to know, so they decided not to occupy Chu Yan's time any longer and left. But lastly, Zhao remembered that there was only one vacant seat in the sect, and that spot wasn't just for the Lin clan, but for the entire city. So if Chu Yang wanted to enter the sect, and he would have to defeat everyone in the city. Apparently Zhao wanted to say that Chu Yang had to fight everyone in the city for this sect position. And besides, the competition is exactly 1 month away, so the prince has a lot of preparation to do. Everyone in the sect will fight for the same spot. Since Chu Yan was misinformed, he decided to accept the offer to become a young master. Either way, he wanted to test just how strong he was. And fighting an entire city, it sounded tempting, especially for someone who liked to reach new heights like Chu Yang. Our hero usually spent his training in the Nirvana Tower. It was here that he could make quick breakthroughs. But for that, he had to give his best. Still, the sacrifices were worth it. After all, without using the tower, the breakthrough would take much longer, but it would be gradual. Chu Yang was pleased with the end result of his training session. After all, this time he had managed to break through to the 4th stage. The prince could feel the strength in his body. And with Zhao Zi and Feng Ru, he didn't have the opportunity to train since they were constantly around him. But finally, he was able to take the time to develop himself. It was like a breath of fresh air for him. He enjoyed his result until he felt a sickening pain on his forehead. The wound that suddenly appeared echoed throughout his body. Chu Yang felt like some kind of torture, and when he was released, he saw strange hieroglyphics on his hand. He had never encountered anything like this before, so he didn't even realize it had happened. To begin with, he tried to catch his breath, and then speculated that it could have been another tech from the tower. But he wasn't sure about this version, so he thought he could figure out what it was in the Lin Clan technician vault. Chu Yan walked back to the mansion, the janitor aghast when he saw the master. The prince had not left his chambers for quite some time, and I don't even remember what day it was. The servant had to remind him that today was the 16th of July. Chu Yang had cultivated in isolation for only 5 days. It had been long enough for our hero. He didn't even know what had been going on here lately. Therefore, the servant also had to clarify that Lin Chong had instructed him to be in charge of the young master's comfort. Well, that was very kind of Uncle Lin. In the meantime, Chu Yang wanted to be escorted to the clan's technique vault. But that was where the trouble started. No one was allowed to go into the tech vault without the clan leader's permission. How would our hero get there now? All he wanted to do was look around, but now he decided to just go for a walk around the city. The servant was kind enough to the young gentleman, and also pointed out to him where the main door was. So our protagonist found himself in a market where there were a lot of people. It was mainly selling groceries, fresh bread, tofu, and so on. Would our hero be able to find what he needed? He kept wandering around the market. The food was running out. You could still see sacks of rice, but a little further on swords were being sold. Among the other swords, one in particular stood out to Chu Yang, for it was engraved with the exact same marks as his hand. He didn't stand alone for long. A salesman came out to him who was willing to help him. Chu Yang had gotten into Da Hang's metal store, and in front of him was precisely the owner of that store, Da Hang. Of course, Chu Yang was solely interested in that ancient sword. The seller told him that this blade was very powerful. The prince had very good eyesight. The sword had a glyph inscription. But before this, Chu Yang had not heard anything about glyphs at all. Glyph inscriptions were written in ancient glyphs. They could be applied to weapons to make them even stronger. Different glyphs had their own special properties. Chu Yan seemed to have found the answer to his question. As for the weapon, it was worth 800 spirit coins due to the fact that it had a glyph. This was a very high price for a sword. But if this sword wasn't broken, it was worth 3 times the price. Chu Yan continued to wonder why the glyph weapon was so expensive. It seemed obvious to the master, so he thought that the young man was joking when asking such questions. And yet he explained that a master with such inscriptions was 1 in a million, and a master with mid-level glyphs was even rarer. Now Chu Yang understood why the sword was so expensive, and that the inscriptions on his hand were not battle techniques, but glyphs. Glyphs could not only strengthen a weapon, but also add certain properties to it. But Da Hang said that they could only be applied to weapons. So why did the glyphs end up on Chu Yang's hand? Master still had a bunch of work to do, so he was expecting Chu Yan to buy his sword or not. He didn't answer the question and asked a new one of his own. He wanted to know if the glyphs could have been written on a body. The vendor already thought the boy had hit his head. How could he have written them on someone's body? Chu Yan wanted to fully understand what was going on, so he decided to show Da Hang the reason why he was interested in all this. Maybe he could tell him something concrete. But it seemed as if Da Hang was seeing something like this for the first time. Master apologized for acting so rudely and took back all his words, hoping that Chu Yan would forgive him. The prince didn't take that rudeness seriously, as he realized that his questions might indeed sound strange. But he just wanted to know what was going on with his body. Da Hang could not answer the traveler's questions, but he knew a place where Chu Yang could probably find the answer to his question. There was the Wanhai trading palace nearby. It was Chu Yang's first time in this city, so he tried to learn more about this place. Wanhai Palace was the largest store in the city. It was rumored to be guarded by experts in measuring meridian formation. Da Hang had also heard that they were cooperating with major sects, which was already interesting. Da Hang felt guilty in front of Chu Yan for behaving rudely with him. Therefore, he decided to present this broken sword with glyphs to him as an apology. This sword was very expensive. Chu Yang could not accept such a gift, so he refused. But Da Hang kept insisting, saying that everything was fine. Da Hang, as our hero noticed, changed his attitude towards it rather quickly, so he still decided to accept this sword as a gift. It was time to leave Da Hang's counter. Chu Yang thanked his new acquaintance and left. Well, it could be said that today's trip to the market for Chu Yang was as good as it could be. Chu Yang decided to go straight to Wanhai Palace. He figured he was probably already close, but he was probably wandering around a bit. As he was trying to figure out the direction, he heard a woman's voice loudly telling someone to disappear. The man we already knew was trying to attract this beauty behind him, but she still wasn't going to give in. Chu Yang immediately recognized Ye Chen and decided to eavesdrop on this conversation. So he climbed up the tree. Ye Chen continued to persuade the girl to come with him, relying on his authority. He even had to give his name and indicate that he was a genius of the Yao clan. The prince, after saying that, was finally convinced that it was that chump Chen, for only he could say such things. This jerk kept dialoguing, you see. He's been very depressed the last few days. And then this beautiful lady came along and lifted his spirits. But the girl wasn't interested in any way. It was obvious to her that a scum like him could only think with his bottom place. Except that it seemed to turn the guy on more than it repulsed him, because he was hot. Of course, his hunting instincts kicked in and he now wished to conquer this girl. Chu Yang was very surprised when he sensed the 4th stage of the martial arts dimension. How could this rascal have reached it so quickly? Milady was now in danger and her maid was frightened. Would she really have to face the battle? The girl couldn't let someone else's male hands touch her mistress, so she attacked Ye Chen in response. Chu Yang continued to quietly watch from his hiding place. The girl managed to fight back against the 4th level master. Mistress didn't even have to lift a finger, for her servant did everything for her. So how could she fight back against a strong opponent? It was very simple. She herself was an expert of the 4th stage of the martial arts dimension. Ye Chen continued flying. He could have fit right into a tree from such an impact. But his attendant stopped him in time. Such power certainly didn't go unnoticed. Not everyone could do it, and he couldn't let that happen, for his young master was not to be harmed. Ye Chen's own servant was not easy either. He was a meridian formation cultivator. Ye Chen was grateful to him, but still asked him not to worry about him, but just to help catch these 2 maidens. The young master could not worry, for now his servant would help him, grab the 2 girls, and then Ye Chen could enjoy himself. Ye Chen was already jubilant, and couldn't wait for his servant to bring him his coveted toys. The girls still prepared to defend her mistress, and somehow even they didn't think of just running away. The meridian formation master was very fast, and the girl was inattentive. In the time it took her to address her mistress, the man had managed to set her sword up, but a 3rd intervened in this fight, protecting the girl from possible injury or even death. Chu Yang had already watched enough from his hiding place, and now he couldn't wait to personally fight such a master. No one could recognize him because he wore a mask on purpose. His intentions, and what he was doing here, no one understood either. Chu Yang preferred to be called just a handsome hero. Ye Chen was unhappy with this situation, because once again, he was being crossed. But of course, Chu Yang couldn't just turn a blind eye to how the 2 girls were offended. The master didn't want to waste time, so he asked his master's permission to finish this guy first, and then deal with the girls. Chu Yang had certainly gotten a bit of a beating from the master, but some sacrifices had to be made. In a quiet clearing in the forest, a complete mortal combat was beginning. Chu Yang was playing with death, trying to fight against the Meridian Formation Master. And so far, he had managed to deal with it. But it would definitely be difficult to defeat such a master. Even though this man had only recently reached the Meridian Formation dimension, the difference between him and Chu Yang in strength was still great. Mostly the prince had to try to avoid any blows, as there was essentially no moment to attack. The master was too fast and agile. But if Chu Yang dragged out this fight, it would be even harder to defeat him. It was necessary to finish him off quickly. Ye Chen had managed to discover his opponent's weaknesses over the course of the fight for some time, so now he decided to help his servant and joined the fight. It was Ye Chen's decision that Chu Yang took as his chance. Therefore, without any hesitation, he attacked the Ye clan's clan member. Master was, of course, responsible for Ye Chen's health, so he needed to urgently pay attention to his master. The girl was still standing still. Chu Yan had to bring her out of her trance a bit to help him. For his master, the master was willing to tear anyone apart, so he prepared to attack Chu Yan again. Our hero, in turn, was already preparing an attack as well, capturing the raging dragon, but he had no time to do anything as the master was right in front of him. Did Chu Yang regret entering this fight? It was hard to tell, and he probably didn't even think about it, as he was focused on the fight. He had to suffer a bit, but it was through the sacrifices that he became stronger. The master's punch hit him very hard, but still, Chu Yang survived, even though the pain was considerable. Before he could fight again, he needed to catch his breath. In the meantime, the mistress maid took the initiative. When fighting against the Meridian Formation Master, the girl decided to use the flaming palm technique. But the master didn't even need to run far away to avoid the attack. He merely spread his legs, and the blow passed him by. The master couldn't get enough of the fact that these guys couldn't defeat him with their flawed techniques, and were probably just wasting their energy. But the man rejoiced early on. Chu Yang recovered quickly enough from the blow, and managed to attack the enemy once again. And yes, Chu Yang still managed to do it. He took the enemy by surprise and defeated them, all thanks to his tactics. Ye Chen couldn't believe his eyes that his master had failed to withstand the attack, and was now just injured at best. But this wasn't the end. Chu Yan noticed that the master was still alive. Yes, he really didn't die after such a blow, although it seemed otherwise. Still, the Meridian Formation Master had his own trump cards. Right now, a new attack from him was coming, so Chu Yang warned all the girls to get out of here. The man was coming down from a tree and appeared to be in good health. The attack that Chu Yan had launched was deadly, and this man still managed to survive. There was nothing else left but to continue the battle. For even if our hero ran away now, probably Ye Chen and his subject were still looking for him. But this time, the prince decided to use Da Hong's gifted sword. He was curious to test the sword's power with glyphs. While the master was sending out his dancing leaf attack, Chu Yang began to activate the glyphs. The sword attack was really strong, and since the man had directed all of his power solely to the attack but not to his defense, he was injured, and probably mortally wounded. Chu Yang won this battle. There were of course losses. The sword finally broke, but fortunately managed to protect our hero, which was not bad. While the prince was looking at his broken sword hilt, Ye Chen couldn't accept the loss of his master, so he decided to attack the offender stealthily. But he was unable to do so, as it was that very same madam who came to Chu Yan's defense. She was able to deal with Ye Chen in an instant, and Chu Yang didn't even notice how it happened. The girl must have reached the Meridian Formation dimension. Chu Yang decided to ask about it directly. It turns out Madame tried to carefully hide it, but the prince was too attentive, and noticed that she was indeed a Meridian Formation dimension cultivator. So she was stronger than Chu Yang. But why hadn't she fought earlier? Besides, she didn't even know that someone would be able to save her. In any case, Chu Yang was in no mood, and since the girls were in no danger, he decided to leave, believing that they would be able to clean up the place by themselves. Mistress didn't expect the guy to leave so quickly, so she wanted to know at least his name. But Chu Yang didn't give her this honor, calling himself a weak young cultivator whose name didn't need to be remembered. He believed that they would meet again if fate brought them together. The maid also didn't understand why the mistress didn't deal with those jerks herself. Cole was in a position to fight. Madame did not answer this question. All her thoughts were on Chu Yan. Judging from his voice and height, she could guess that he was her age and no weaker than her. Therefore, she wanted to know who this guy was. But the strongest thing she was still interested in was Chu Yan's summoning ability. By summoning ability, the mistress meant the ancient technique that allowed fighters to store weapons in their bodies. That was why the girl wanted to know who her mysterious savior was after all. He was considered a true genius, but she had never heard of him in Chongqing City. The maid promised to find out later, but the mistress said she shouldn't. In any case, they had other things to worry about now, like burying 2 people. In fact, the maid was ready to fulfill this task as well. Meanwhile, Chu Yang, when he managed to move away from the girls, decided to pause for a bit. There was blood oozing from his pelvis. The enemy had seriously injured him. If he hadn't used all his strength to block his blow last time, he might be dead by now. And if that master struck him again, he would definitely die. Meridian Formation measurement stage cultivators were serious opponents. Chu Yang understood that he shouldn't mess around with such in the future, with this kind of battle training. Chu Yang nervously swallowed his blood and kept recalling the previous fight. After all, he also had to use a glyph sword, which, fortunately, was strong. And that strength was enough to keep the prince alive, thanks to him. In the past few days, he had learned quite a few new things, like glyphs, or learned the masters of measuring meridian formation. There was still room for him to strive, so he had to cultivate more. When he came to his senses, he had to go to the Wanhai Trading Palace. Now he found it without any adventures. The palace had a lot of really cool stuff and a lot to look at. Of course, our hero's attention was drawn to the weapons shop. So he turned to the merchant, as he had already looked at something and wanted to buy it. The vendor appreciated Chu Yang's flawed appearance and looked at him with distrust, but nevertheless decided to serve the guy. Chu Yang first of all asked if the merchant had a glyph inscription tool. He wanted to buy such a set. The vendor became even more confused and incredulously clarified. Did Chu Yang really want to become an inscription master? Chu Yang answered quite adequately and was completely serious, but he was not perceived as he would have liked and just laughed. How could he, such a beggar in torn clothes, become a master of glyph inscriptions? Chu Yang did not understand such a reaction to his query, as if he was saying something unrealistic. Why couldn't he be such a master? The merchant decided to miss out on the prices of these tools. Decided to ask a counter-question. Did Chu Yang know how to apply these glyph inscriptions? The prince knew this, of course, and also demonstrated the glyph inscriptions on his body to the merchant. At first, surprise changed again to laughter. He engaged others in this dialogue and didn't hesitate to embarrass his potential buyer. This idiot wanted to become a master of glyph inscriptions, and now he claims he was able to transfer them onto his arm. That's ridiculous. When the gentleman had laughed in satisfaction, his face grew kinder, and he decided to take pity on the young man, and also show him what a real master glyph is. In his hand, he held the actual inscription of the glyph, and next to it, they brought him more glyphs of the elements of fire and wind. All of them were applied in the only master glyph in the city, and they could be used to enhance weapons. Inscriptions could be made with special knives and boards. If they are made with high-end tools, their price will at least double. The price of each of these boards is 1,000 silver coins. It was very expensive, but if Chu Yang were to do it himself, it would be a great method for making money. Such boards weren't cheap either, and Chu Yang continued to stand his ground and wanted to buy them. The merchant still couldn't hide his surprise that such an ordinary beggar tramp was going to become a glyph master. He didn't say that out loud, so he decided to just tell the price. The cheapest knife cost 500, and the boards were 80 each. The prince thought about it, and still wanted to take at least 2 boards for practice. Luckily, the Lin clan had given him 800 silver coins. The merchant, although he did not believe that Chu Yang would buy something from him, but for the sake of decency, he decided to inquire about the final answer. He decided to buy 3 boards and 1 knife after all. The total amount was 740 silver coins. Today our hero was kind, so he decided to give everyone 800, and the merchant could keep the change. The merchant did not react to this generosity in any way, simply asking the servants to give the items to the customer. There didn't seem to be anything so amazing about these things, but they cost a lot. You could buy a sword. With the shopping done, Chu Yang left the palace, and the merchant exhaled a sigh of relief as that bum left. The merchant was still reeling from his scum client's intention to become a glyph master. But the servant guessed that this fellow was from the Lin clan. Finally, after a dangerous journey, Chu Yang finally returned to his temporary home. He didn't even intend to rest, immediately immersing himself in the cultivation process. This journey gave him a lot of experience, especially with the interaction with the Meridian Formation Dimension cultivator. Our hero's injuries still hadn't recovered from the time of that battle. He tried to get into his feelings and start meditating, but it was like some kind of boom went off in his case. Chu Yang would then cough up blood, then continue to scream in pain, and now that it had passed, he was trying to catch his breath. These were familiar feelings to the prince, but he couldn't grasp what those feelings were specifically. The feeling was the same as that of Qi energy, those cultivators measuring the meridian formation. This energy, it was as if it was overflowing Chu Yang's entire body and flowing through his meridians. Soon, this energy spread to the outside world that was around him, becoming some sort of hurricane. The light around him was so bright you could even see it from the tower window. It was obvious and yet unexpected at the same time. Chu Yang was able to move to the meridian formation dimension level quite quickly. Now he himself could feel the very power of a meridian formation dimensional cultivator himself. It was an amazing feeling to him, as if his energy was now boundless. And now he had a great desire to use that power right now. First, he decided to test it on this stone column. Yes, even in the previous stage he would have been able to make such a blow, but this time it was given to him with extraordinary ease. It was without a doubt very powerful. Another level had many more of the privileges of the previous one. But now the prince wanted to try out the inscription kit. Even though he was strong, he could use the extra money, and the knowledge would come in handy in life. Chu Yang was glad that he still managed to keep this earring, because thanks to it, he could store things inside it. It was more convenient even than the Kunlun bag. When our hero said that he knew how to apply glyphs, he was lying. Now he was thinking about how he should have done it properly. He recalled the glyphs on the sword, figuring he could learn something by studying them. And indeed, that sword had probably been affected by the glyph enhancement. For our hero, it was an exciting process. He didn't know how to start, and so he decided to just give in to the feelings. It was as if the process went on its own, as if some higher self knew what needed to be done. And Chu Yang trusted the process and did not interfere. And after a while, the first glyph was ready. It looked no worse than the master's, but it was still unknown if it had any properties. Chu Yang doubted whether it was similar to the store, but he was happy with the result. It was his first time doing it after all. Chu Yang continued to study writing for another 2 hours, and when his strength began to leave him, he laid down on the floor. He couldn't figure out what the problem was and what was wrong with his glyphs, because they were completely different from what he needed. Therefore, Chu Yang decided to return to the merchant in Wanhai Palace the next day. Perhaps there would be some guidance for him. The merchant was on a tear. There were many customers. He had to command servants to help the customers. Chu Yang understood that they were in a jam here, but he also had some things to deal with. The prince decided not to ask directly what was wrong with his glyphs, but simply offer to sell them and see the merchant's reaction. The man was of course very surprised, since it was most likely impossible to finish the inscription in one day. Therefore, the merchant assumed that Chu Yang wanted to sell the work of another master. The merchant was interested, and even decided to be friendly to the boy, hoping that he could bring him a mighty power in the future. Therefore, without wasting time, he asked Chu Yang to show him his work. Maybe there really was something worthy there. A discouragement bordering on hysterical laughter could be seen on the man's face when he saw Chu Yan's glyphs. He couldn't hold back his emotions for long and finally laughed out loud. He couldn't figure out if the boy was really serious when he called his creature a glyph. If Chu Yang didn't know how to apply glyph inscriptions, then he shouldn't be here bragging about the fact that he could do so. The glyphs that Chu Yang had made only gave a small increase in strength. Right now, the elemental glyphs were gaining popularity. Chu Yang now understood. What was the matter? Because he had felt that he was doing something wrong even before. And yet the merchant was not ready to give much for these glyphs. At most, 500 silver coins. After all, they did not have any properties of the elements. This price did not suit our hero because it was too cheap. So he decided to bargain. Perhaps the merchant could offer him a little more. But the one was adamant. This was all he could offer. And if Chu Yang wasn't going to sell them, then Xiaoe had to show this guest where the exit was. Chu Yang unhappily clucked. Still, he decided to sell his glyphs for 500 silver. In total, our hero received 500 silver coins for 3 boards of glyphs. He did not count it, as he trusted the high reputation of the trade palace. Before the prince left, the merchant suggested that he visit the black market. There were many herbs there that could add or enhance the power of the Chu Yang glyph element. This man was a merchant, and if he saw that Chu Yang was making money, he realized that he could also enrich himself, so he decided to help the boy. Chu Yang hurriedly went out and thanked the merchant for the information, and as he came out, he met a rich carriage. The wagon was harnessed to a huge beast that looked something like a horse and a fairy tale monster at the same time. Chu Yang could not immediately remember what kind of creature it was, but after taking a closer look at the marvelous beast, he realized that it was a Qilin. He recalled seeing one in the palace earlier, but here there were 2 of them. The carriage itself was very well decorated. Even the wheels had jewels attached. One could only guess who could own such a luxurious carriage with a Celine beast. The person who owned it was obviously not a commoner. 2 servants came out of the wagon first, to help their mistress get out comfortably. Chu Yang still continued to watch as he was very interested in the carriage master. When the lady appeared, everything became clearer. That girl was the glyph master, the one and only one in all of Changqing. Chu Yang was still standing in front of the cart. As if he was unable to move anywhere, the girl walked right past him. And as she passed, the 2 crossed glances, as if trying to memorize each other. This was a special moment. But Chu Yang hurriedly did not betray such a specialness to him. After all, it was not unusual for him to see a glyph master here. Now I had more important things to do. I had to check out the black market. The merchant especially catered to Miss Su, bowing to her, asking about her affairs, and was more loyal to her than to Chu Yang. Her servant answered instead. Mrs. Su had come here to buy tools for inscribing glyphs, and the merchant was just smiling, bowing, and agreeing to everything that was said to him, just to please the dear guest. Of course, he was assisted by Xiaoe, then bringing the necessary items for sale, then giving money to customers or picking up. In the meantime, Xiaoe was given a new task. The merchant decided to seize the opportunity and approached Lady Su, or rather, Master Su, angry to find out how her father was doing. Instead of the girl, her servant hurriedly answered. The merchant had no right to know about what was going on inside the sect, but his mistress interrupted him, explaining that he should have watched his behavior. The servant apologized, and only then did the girl tell the merchant that all was well. The merchant was just trying to make small talk, nothing more. But the girl noticed something more interesting, namely, the new glyphs that were made by Chu Yang. Madame Su had already assumed that there was a new glyph master in the city. However, The merchant did not hide the fact that he got them from a young master whom the gentleman met at the entrance to the palace. The merchant still didn't know where he got them from, but he decided to buy them anyway. He had already had time to assume there was something wrong with them or they were fake. But no. Mrs. Su explained that such glyphs were very rare to find, and as her servant told her, these glyphs could strengthen a fighter by a maximum of 2 times. But Ms. Su's glyphs could increase a fighter's strength by 3 times. The merchant once again tried to make small talk. This was to be expected from a genius of one of the great sects of cultivators. After all, a 3-fold increase was very impressive. Mrs. Su continued, because it was only one set that was doubling the strength. The other one was triple, and the third one was quadruple. That is to say, if one used the glyphs correctly, a martial arts dimension martial artist could easily kill a meridian formation dimension cultivator with them. Without any embarrassment, Mrs. Su admitted that the exact same set of glyphs would be difficult for her to make. The merchant looked surprised. He felt as if Master Su was just playing a joke on him. Su began to think back to the moment when she first met that young guy the merchant had told her about. As they passed each other, the mistress clearly noticed the flow of strong energy. It seemed to her that his body was overflowing with chi energies, and it felt like his meridians had already begun to form. Madame Su wanted to say by this that he had probably reached the meridian formation dimension just like her. The girl could also assume that he had cultivated very quickly. How could such a thing be possible at such a young age? But the result was obvious. If Ms. Su could reach this level at her age, then others could achieve it as well. There was only one thing. But Madame was a member of the great sect, which meant she had support and resources. Then it was logical to assume that that guy was also a member of such a sect. Anyway, Su wanted to meet this guy and asked the merchant to let her know the next time he would be here and try to keep him busy. Meanwhile, our hero wandered through the black market. It was very large, and accordingly there could find a lot of things. His attention flickered to the plant vendor when he saw the firetail herb. Surprisingly, such vegetation was sold not by a woman in a scarf, but by a pumped-up bald man. The firetail herb must have broken all records for the prices our hero had met in this city lately, for it cost 5,000 silver coins. It seemed like a real ripoff. But no, the seller nonchalantly explained that that was the price of his weed and no ripoff. Chu Yang was practically broke, and he needed this herb, so such prices were simply unfair to him. He wanted to deal with the merchant for bribing him so openly, but the vendor's chi was too powerful, and it seems he was beyond our hero's grasp. Surprisingly, he was not aggressive, and even praised Chu Yang for being able to reach the meridian formation dimension at such a young age. It impressed him. However, the merchant was a die-element dimension cultivator. It was obvious that Chu Yang would not be able to compete with him. Only Chu Yang had never even heard of such a dimension. In the entire black market, the firetail herb was only available at this uncle's place, so he could put any price he wanted for it. He didn't care whether Chu Yang would buy it or not. He wasn't going to change the price. Discontent was so expressed on Chu Yan's face, the vendor understood that the boy didn't have any money. So he suggested he go to the arena. He could make decent money there if he won a few rounds. The prince didn't have time for the arena, but the salesman explained to him that it didn't take that long. Just one victory could earn 2,000 silver already, and that was only part of the prize pool. The winner would receive 10,000 silver coins. The underground arena was the best place where beggar guys like Chu Yang could earn some money. To think that Chu Yang could fight opponents who were of the same level as him. Therefore, not only could he become stronger, but he was also getting paid for it. It was a tempting offer, especially when our hero needed money urgently in large quantities. But he still could not understand what kind of opponents of his level. There was nothing more the vendor could tell about the arena. If Chu Yang was so curious, he had to go and find out for himself. He was kind and even pointed out the way to the arena. Chu Yang had to go to the very end of this passage. But our hero had to think carefully. After all, if he went in there would be no turning back. He stood right in front of the entrance, where shouts could still be heard as he fought. Chu Yan really thought about it. If he could become stronger here, then it was definitely worth it. Once he had his priorities straightened out, he had no more doubts and walked into the hall where there were many people. He hadn't expected to see such a lively place in the basement. Not only the fighters were shouting here, but also the spectators themselves. They cheered for their favorites, shouting various words of encouragement. But it is also important to learn that they were quite bloodthirsty, shouting for one to kill the other. Chu Yang only needed 2 minutes for him to realize that this place was the best place in the world for him. In that case, it was time to figure out how he could get involved in those fights too. An employee of this arena pointed him to the left, and let him take it from there. Not everyone could participate in the battle, but only fighters of the third stage of the martial arts dimension and above could participate. The participant had to state his age, cultivation measurement, and the weapon he was going to use. And so finally, it was the turn of our hero. He introduced himself as it should have been. There were so many people that the worker did not even pay attention to the guy, and just mechanically performed his work. But when he heard the meridian formation measurement level, he raised his eyes in a rush at the young man standing in front of him. Very loudly, the man called out to Lao Liu and asked him to take this guy to the next qualifying stage. All meridian formation measurement cultivators automatically passed on. A middle-aged man appeared in front of our hero. Lao Liu asked Chu Yang to go to some other place where he was expected. There, a young and expensively dressed man asked his interlocutor to wait for him here, under the pretext that he would be right back. And while Chu Yang was waiting to be approached, he felt that of everyone here, only these two were very strong. One could even assume that they were around the same age as Chu Yang. These guys could give him some competition. The man in green briefly, his winded gaze swept over Chu Yang. He was clearly interested in something. He introduced himself as Shima Feng. The smile on his face made him look more friendly, and didn't even give away any dual interests. It was some time before our hero realized that it was he who was being addressed. Shima Feng continued to be friendly, and Chu Yang was wary, for he wasn't even familiar with this guy. Chu Yan really didn't know Shima Feng, but the latter had heard something about him. Since Chu Yang was originally flying in the clouds, Shima Feng had to repeat his name once again. Just as the guy had expected, this was Chu Yan's first time here. This impressed Shima Feng, for Chu Yang had a very high level of cultivation for his age. Chu Yang, of course, could not help but notice the amazing strength of his new acquaintance. Lao Lu was back again. The next qualifying stage was about to begin. Cultivators were to line up behind each other and take turns to come up and place their hand on this sphere. The first to volunteer was this young man. When he placed his hand on the sphere, 4 lines were formed there. This meant that he had a 4th stage martial arts dimension, something he probably boasted about often. However, people didn't hide their admiration either. The 4th stage was also a rarity. As the next one approached the sphere, Shima Feng once again struck up a conversation with Chu Yang, wondering what the latter thought of their strength. Chu Yang was objective. These guys appeared strong to him, and he believed that fighting them would not be easy. Shima Feng was surprised by this answer, for he had a different opinion on this matter. No one here would be able to oppose him. Chu Yang then asked about the guy that Shima Feng was hanging around earlier. He seemed strong to our hero. Lao Lu had met different fighters, but this one was particularly tall and seemed confident. Shima Feng began to realize who he was talking about, and Chu Yang continued to reason. It seemed to him that this guy could very well be the strongest here. It was certainly not weak, because 3 green stripes were found on the sphere. This was the 3rd stage of measuring the meridian formation. The 4th stage of martial arts was rare, but how much rarer was the 3rd stage of the meridian formation dimension? It was frightening to imagine who his opponent would be, and this guy was even a bit stronger than Chu Yang had imagined. But the interlocutor just laughed at that. Shima Feng was quite confident and kept saying that that guy was no match for them. Tonight was getting more and more interesting for Shima Feng. Chu Yang was starting to like Shima Feng and getting to know him, but alas, Shima Feng had to apologize, for he was not a guy's type, but was still grateful for such a compliment. Chu Yang languished in thought as to how Shima Feng could know his name and who he really was. Therefore, he decided to just ask. Shima Feng explained to the Lin clan's son-in-law that he knew everything that was happening in Changqing City. And the way Shima Feng called our hero the son-in-law of the Lin clan, it seemed even more mysterious. Chu Yang was discouraged because he did not have an answer to his question. But the guy just laughed, because Chu Yang would already understand when he found out who Shima Feng was. He promised that he would no longer hide his identity. Shima Feng was a member of the strongest clan of the 3 great families of Changqing City. A young, handsome, talented, and charming young master of the Bai clan. Chu Yang was now pensive, beginning to remember that Zhao Zi had told him something about this clan. But still, he had to ask again, why was there no Bai prefix in Shima Feng's surname? Shima Feng asked to be quiet. He confessed to his new acquaintance that he was just using a pseudonym because he didn't want anyone to recognize him. Chu Yang had actually started to feel a friendly sympathy for Shima Feng. This guy seemed interesting to him. Now it was Chu Yang and Shima Feng's turn to test their strength. Each in turn, just as Lao Lu had said, touched the sphere with his hand. And in order for the force measurement to happen, you had to transfer your force to the sphere. When this happened, a bright light spilled out from where the sphere was standing. and the audience had to turn away and cover their eyes to avoid being blinded. 4 green stripes appeared on the sphere. Sima Feng possessed a 4th stage meridian formation measurement. To Chu Yang, the sphere showed the 6th stage. But Sima Feng somehow felt that the guy had just reached the meridian formation dimension, and now he had no idea that he would turn out to be so strong. From the outside, Chu Yang might have looked satisfied, pretending that everything was as it should be. But he was actually happy that no one had noticed anything. After all, he was able to show the power of the 6th stage of the meridian formation dimension, thanks to the intensification of the glyph on his hand. Chu Yang himself did not expect that Sima Feng would be at the 4th stage. The two of them were both strong. When the strength was determined, Lao Lu suggested that the guys go to the locker room to rest and change their clothes. Then they could perform in the arena. Chu Yang decided to continue to follow with Sima Feng. This was clearly not the first time he was here, and proceeded to draw his weapon. Chu Yang was slightly confused, for he didn't even know how here and what was going on, so he had to catch up with his friend. So they ended up backstage, where they could actually rest and change clothes. And the weapons here were just trash. In fact, for a meridian formation cultivator, it couldn't help in any way. But those were the rules, and there was nothing the guys could do about it. Sima Feng noticed that Chu Yan's clothes were old and torn, so he offered him new ones. Chu Yan refused at first, but the guy was persistent and handed over a bundle of clothes as a gift. Our hero had to agree. He immediately decided to change his clothes, and the suit turned out to be just the right size for him. Sima Feng even noticed that Chu Yang's costume definitely suited him. It was true that this suit made him look like a wealthy young man instead of a brat. Lao Liu appeared in the locker room. He was explaining the rules of this fight. Only the 10 winners of this fight could advance to the next round. A lot of people liked these fights, so they were happy to take the news. These 3 guys were the 3 demons of the demonic island. There were even rumors that they could defeat a meridian formation dimension cultivator. It was unknown how they managed it, but if a meridian dimension cultivator lost to them, the other fighters should have been more careful. Lastly, Lao Liu also explained that when the gate opened, the fighters would be able to enter the arena. The underground arena was very popular. Such fights were not in the rules, but the authorities turned a blind eye to it, as the organizers were influential people, and every fight was attended by many people. It was Chu Yang's first time here, so he tried to see everything, and was surprised that there were many people here. Sima Feng warned his new friend to keep his eyes open, or else he wouldn't even notice how he would lose. There were supposed to be about 50 participants today. It would seem that if there were 50, didn't that mean it was a meat grinder of 100 fighters? Chu Yang looked bored until a certain time, but when he gazed at his opponents, his gaze changed. Among the crowd, he recognized a girl he had seen once before. It was that forest mistress. Earlier, he had saved her from the cultivator of the meridian formation dimension. Back then, there was only one cultivator, but now there were many more. But Chu Yan was not weak either. Among the crowd, he still spotted Yo Hen, but for some reason, he looked a little strange. Sima Feng was nearby and noticed Chu Yang's sudden change in mood. He had hit right on the mark when he assumed that Chu Yang had met his nemesis here. The audience and the fighters themselves were getting bored with the chatter of the presenters. They couldn't wait for the fight to begin. Everyone was eerily curious to see who would still come out the strongest from this fight. Before the fight, Chu Yang decided to put on a mask, just in case. He did not take any weapons, and neither did Sima Feng, who had a fan that served as more than just an accessory. This fight promised to be truly entertaining. After all, the strongest fighters had gathered here, and each of them wanted to emerge victorious. Meanwhile, outside the arena, not far away, still in Changqing City, a suspicious man could be seen floating in the sky. The man from up high looked around the city. He was here for the first time and had clearly come to the right place. Whether he was looking for Chu Yang, whether it was by his own volition or someone else's orders, was still unknown. But what was clear was that he wanted to wipe this city off the face of the earth with him. It was a very ordinary day for the people, until they noticed a bright flash in the sky. And then there was an explosion that really took over the entire city, and yet fate brought the lady and the prince together again. The girl quickly recognized the boy from the forest. Sima Feng was watching our hero, after all. So little time had passed, and he was already with a girl. What was it? Jealousy? While they were fighting, Madame decided to find out what Chu Yang was doing here. He didn't hide the fact that he wanted to earn some money. The conversation was a bit interrupted. A bit more attention needed to be paid to the fight. There were opponents on all sides. It was as if the girl herself was trying to deal with them quickly so she could continue the dialogue. But Sima Feng, whom she had not heard anything about, suddenly approached her. Sima Feng probably assumed that the girl really knew Chu Yan, so he explained that he was in company with him. Too bad. Miss Chu Yang's name was not heard, and it was heard by someone who shouldn't have known it. Ye Chen shouted Chu Yang's name loudly, as if he was ready to tear him to pieces. But at the same moment the ceiling began to collapse, and huge cobblestones began to fall right into the arena. Everyone was taken by surprise. No one understood what was happening, but we had to run away from this place. Sima Feng and Chu Yan were somehow maneuvering between the cobblestones, trying to make sense of what was happening. And then the girl noticed someone's figure above, who was probably the culprit of what was happening. Whereas before, Sima Feng had been calm the entire time and maintained a lightness in his mood. Now looking at the man who appeared, he couldn't hide his surprise. He had no idea who it was, but the smell of blood that came from him, and the fact that he was flying, made Sima Feng have a premonition of very bad events and the destructive power of the stranger. A disgruntled Ye Hyun came out from under the cobblestone. Surprisingly, he was not crushed, and now he was complaining to the stranger. Did he even know who Ye Hyun was? But the stranger didn't care who this upstart was, so he ran him over like an ant. Ye Hyun-gun was killed with a single blow. What kind of power did the stranger have? Ye Henkong's death made the other fighters very angry, so they all decided to attack the stranger together. But this only showed that he was incredibly strong and could control his Kui from a distance. But only cultivators of the Dai element dimension and above were capable of such a thing. One could assume that this man had reached the boundless heaven dimension. When the stranger had dealt with the annoying fighters, he turned his attention to the one he had started it all for, Chu Yang. It was his time to die. The stranger started to attack Chu Yang, but Sima Feng released her wind streams from the fan in time to protect Chu Yang. Brother Jima's punch prevented Chu Yang's terrible fate and prevented the stranger from carrying out what he had planned. From the force of those blows, Chu Yang collapsed on the floor, and Sima Feng was still slightly injured. Shema did everything instinctively, and when he was able to repel the first blow, he felt a slight shock, as if he couldn't believe what was happening. He didn't want to talk for long, ordering the girl and Chu Yan to run away from here while he detained the stranger himself. This guy seemed to have lost his mind, not realizing at all that he was going to fight a cultivator of the boundless heaven dimension. Shema Feng was completely serious, and it seems that he was rarely in such a mood. With a formidable shout, he once again told the guys to run away from here. They were already in agreement, but would they really be able to escape from a stranger? He was elusive and fast. Even Shima Feng had a hard time catching him and engaging him in a duel. Sima Feng was of no use to him. He didn't want to waste time on him, so he sought out Chu Yan. He didn't even need to get close to injure his victim. He slashed Chu Yan and Madam's chest at the same time, and they didn't even have time to react. Gemma could have escaped from here, but for some reason, he continued to stay here, worried about Chu Yan. The prince was still alive, so he could ask the man questions. The stranger reminded him of his royal brother Chu Qing. Chu Yang should have guessed on his own that his younger brother had sent a mercenary to him. No one else but him would spend so much money to hire a top-notch expert to kill a little thing like Chu Yang, something he was not shy to say about himself. The outcome was a foregone conclusion, but the mercenary was kind, and if Chu Yan wanted to say something last, he could do so. But Chu Yang refused to speak. He had nothing to say. He had already accepted his death and did not even try to resist. But it was a bit early for him to die. Jiema Feng had apparently just found a friend and was not ready to say goodbye to him, so he rushed to his aid and grabbed his mistress. Brother Shima couldn't just let Chu Yan die like that. The stranger was unhappy, because he had hoped to get rid of everyone quickly, and now everything was slipping out of his hands again. Therefore, he wasn't going to let them go so easily, but Jiema Feng planned to escape through the ceiling that had been destroyed. Before he flew off, he left a barrier behind him so the mercenary would linger and they would have time to escape. Yes, Jiema Feng could fly. He was a cultivator of the boundless heaven dimension. The mercenary here was getting more and more interesting, and more interesting. The man was trying to get away from the mercenary. He was flying while keeping 2 people with him. His plan was to hide in the sect that was in the north, but his eyes became 5 kopecks each when he saw the city of Changqing, which no longer existed. The mercenary kept his word and wiped Changqing off the face of the earth. While Chu Yang was still conscious, Shema Feng tried to talk to him and find out who he really was. He remembered that mercenary cultivator definitely knew about Chu Yang's background. He also mentioned something about Chu Yang's royal brother. Well, wasn't he a young master of the Lin clan? Why did they want to kill him? It would be difficult to talk about it briefly, So Chu Yang explained that it was a long story, they could talk about it later. Especially Chu Yang noticed with the edge of his eye that Mercenary was right behind them. Right now, they needed to focus more on how to survive and escape from this cultivator. The stranger kept demanding that Zima Feng give him Chu Yang, but he kept refusing and decided that he would never give him back. When the mercenary realized that talking wasn't going to get him anywhere, he had to speed up to keep up with his victims. The mercenary annoyed Sima Feng as he had no intention of letting them go. Therefore, Chu Yang suggested that Shima's brother along with the girl run away by themselves and leave him behind. But the mercenary's patience had run out. Now no one could escape from them anymore. He decided not to chase anymore, but to attack at once. With his single strike, the cultivator made many holes in the rocks. Such force also caught Shima Feng, but fortunately he was not fatally attacked. Only Shima lost his balance, and because of that, he accidentally let go of his friend's hand. From the mercenary's attention, this of course did not escape. He was not going to waste this moment and attacked Chu Yang once again. Just in time, an old man stood in front of the boy, and with just one hand, he redirected the cultivator's strike somewhere to the side. He did it with such ease, as if it cost him nothing. The cultivator had only met weak fighters before, but now he was facing a worthy opponent who could compete with him in terms of strength. The cultivators didn't know each other, so the first one who decided to introduce himself first was the mercenary whose name was Kang Shanren II. This name was familiar to the old man. Kang Shanren II was the one who had slaughtered everyone on the Great Sung Mountain 10 years ago. That's what he called himself. Kang Shanren II noticed that the old man could also control his ki from a distance, supporting Chu Yang in the air, which meant that he was also a boundless heaven dimension cultivator. The old man wasn't on the boundless heaven dimension, and this really scared Kang Shanren, because if he was a higher level, he could probably read his mind. If an old man couldn't read boundless heaven dimension cultivators at such a small stage, then he wouldn't respect himself. Kang Shanren took this response as an insult, for this insolent old man dared to look down on him. He attacked the old man to show his superiority over him, but the first blow was repulsed. Kang Shanren didn't stop and continued to attack the new opponent, but it was all in vain. The second, third, even the 10th. The old man fought back with ease. There were 5 stages of the martial arts dimension, and 6 stages of the meridian formation dimension, 8 stages of the elemental die dimension, and only then could a cultivator advance to the boundless heaven dimension. Song Shanren's cultivation level was impressive to the old man, but he should have left this place while the old man himself was nicely warned about it. Kang Shanren asked who the old man really was for the umpteenth time, and finally had to answer. He was just an old man who was walking here and came here because he heard the sounds of explosions. Shima Feng paid attention to the old man's clothes. There was a special mark that indicated that he belonged to a sect. Once, he had even heard that there was a great community in the west of the city. The Mystic Moon sect, the Lin Miao Ran sect, submitted to it. Kang Shanren was tired of cat and mouse. He didn't care who the old man was. He just wanted to teach him a lesson that he didn't need to look down on cultivators, the boundless heaven dimension. The mercenary was going to do something terrifying. Shima Feng wasn't going to run away from here. He was worried about his grandfather, but he basically couldn't do anything himself. The old man was still calm and treated Kang Shanren's actions as if they were a joke. It was as if he was purposely giving him a chance to play around. Kang Shanren sent 3 streams of strikes at the old man at once, but the old man easily blocked all of these strikes with his shield chi. He didn't strain himself, but it seemed as if he was bored with it all. But the mercenary didn't lose hope. He decided to change tactics and use his weapon, hoping that this time he would put an end to the old man. Either it was Kang Shanren's strike that was weak, or the old man was too strong. The mercenary had attacked his grandfather so many times, but still hadn't done any damage to him. Kang Shanren moved as close to the old man as possible. He didn't understand what the old man was thinking. He could easily kill him. The mercenary was eerily curious to know what it was like when you felt doomed. The old man was unfamiliar with this feeling, and Kang Shanren didn't need to look somewhere to the side when he fought. But at least Kang Shanren would be able to experience the feeling of doom himself and not ask anyone such stupid questions. The old man had helped him with this. With just a single flick, Kang Shanren, a cultivator of the boundless heaven dimension, flew away like a gnat. He certainly had no chance of surviving. Kang Shanren was killed in a single blow, right outside the town he destroyed. Sima Feng didn't know where to go. He had been watching the entire time, and this time, he couldn't hide his surprise when he saw the death of a boundless heaven dimension cultivator. Shima couldn't even imagine who this old man was. How much power did he have in him? Before he could think about it, he had himself right in front of him. The old man suggested that the young man take the wounded to his sect. Shima didn't fully understand which sect, and then the old man realized that he hadn't even introduced himself. His memory was already failing him a little. This old man was the patriarch of the Mystic Moon sect, Ye Xiuwen. This was the first time Shima Feng had ever met such a person in his life. For he was not just a patriarch. He was the patriarch of one of the 4 great communities of the Zhang Kingdom. But for some reason, all the time, it seemed to Shima Feng as if Ye Xiuwen had retired, which he didn't hesitate to say out loud. Ye Xiuwen was not embarrassed, and admitted that he had purposely let this rumor out. The Mystic Moon sect was recruiting new disciples in Changqing City, so Ye Xiuwen appeared here to check on his main disciple. And then this guy blew up an entire city, which scared Ye Xiuwen, so he quickly flew away. Next, he crashed into the guys as they were running away from the scumbag, and it just so happened that the old man happened to save the guys, for which CM was grateful to the master. And Ye Xiuwen also noticed that Jiema had his little head disciple in his hands, so the master could also be calm and mutually thanked Jiema for saving her. Things seemed to be getting better, and the dialogue with the master was also progressing. Before this, Shima hadn't introduced himself, and only now gave his name. After a while, the meaning of the recently spoken words came to him, that he had the master's main apprentice in his hands. But all later, now they decided to continue their journey and go to the Mystic Moon sect, for it was the safest there. Shima Feng was extremely surprised when he found out that Lin Miaoran was Ye Xiuwen's main disciple. Now it was no wonder that the old man was so strong. But in Ye Xiuwen's opinion, Shima Feng was not bad either. He couldn't even understand how Shima was able to learn how to fly at such a young age. Shima was open and didn't hide the fact that he had a weak dimension compared to Ye Xiuwen. And he learned to fly thanks to the techniques of the independent family sect he belonged to. Probably if Shima had the strength, he would have saved the whole city. There was an unbelievable disaster in Changqing. Who knows if there were any survivors? Ye Xiuwen recalled seeing Miaoran's grandfather once. Now there was no information about what had happened to the Lin family. One could only hope that heaven would help those in distress, and the Lin family would surely be saved. Ye Xiuwen couldn't help but agree with this. The Lin family was a beautiful family and sect. It was a shame that such a fate had befallen them. Ye Xiuwen thought about the fact that when Miaoran found out about this, she would probably be completely crushed. Suddenly he thought of another young man, and Shima had to tell what he knew about him. And he knew enough. Chu Yang was Miaoran's future fiancé, as well as a cultivator of the 6th stage of the Meridian Formation dimension. Shima hadn't known our hero for that long, so he couldn't tell more than that. But nevertheless, even this information interested the old man. Still, Shima was convinced that there were many good qualities in this guy. Shima Feng immediately noticed that Chu Yang was interested in Ye Xiuwen. He didn't hide it, though. The old man just liked funny guys. And so they finally reached the house of Ye Xiuwen, or as he called himself, the useless old man. This is what the Mystic Moon sect looked like. Everything is very practical and nothing superfluous. It was even unlikely that anyone would be able to find it if they didn't try their best to look for it. But there was no need to be so surprised. It was only the front entrance. There were guards at the entrance, and in the air they spotted an unfamiliar old man and 3 other people with him. One of them noticed the Mystic Moon sect's uniform on the old man, but no one could recognize him. The guard decided to check what kind of guests were here. He stopped the guys and asked them to introduce themselves. Shima Feng was mildly amazed that the guards didn't know their patriarch. But they couldn't be blamed for this. After all, Ye Xiuwen himself had started a rumor about himself that he wasn't there. So they thought that they had some devil in front of them, for everyone knew that the patriarch had left them a long time ago. The old man's memory was failing him again. He had forgotten that he had not told these guys that he was alive. One would think that now no one knew that Ye Xiuwen wasn't dead and was still the patriarch. The old man had to rack his brain and remember what his brothers knew about him. The guards weren't happy to have people standing around in front of them talking, so they decided to waste no time and just catch the guys and bring them straight to the master. The assignment was clear, so he decided to get right to it. But what are our boys to do? The old man tried to think, and came up with the idea that they would explain everything when they were captured. Ye Xiuwen decided to try talking to the guards again, to explain to them that they were good people and shouldn't have gotten so heated. But the guards wouldn't listen to him and walked forward towards them. Shima Feng was in a panic and was just asking not to be killed. An old man, apparently, he was up to something. Ye Xiuwen was still standing still, and the guards were already flying straight towards him. When a shallow distance separated them, the men froze right in front of the old man. Amazing. But this was different from what Ye Xiuwen had said earlier. Shima originally thought that they would let themselves be caught by the guards. Ye Xiuwen seemed to have forgotten his words. and wondered to himself, when had he said they would let themselves be caught? Meanwhile, the clan itself was actively practicing, until one of the employees reported an old man and a few people to the trainer. The man immediately recognized his patriarch and older brother, to which he was surprised. Equally surprised were the disciples who thought the patriarch was dead. Xiaoe promised to explain everything a little later, because right now, it was much more important to heal Miao Ran and the one youth. Little brother immediately reacted. He was even slightly startled when he found out that Miao Ran was injured, so he immediately ordered the medics to take her and the guy to the healing spring. When he finally did give the instructions, he tried to get at least something out of his older brother. What was going on after all? Xiaoe briefly explained that Miao Ran and her companions had encountered a boundless heaven dimension cultivator assassin on their way. The younger brother continued to listen with undisguised interest and sympathy, for surely the disciple and the others had suffered when they met a person who had reached the highest attainment of the martial world. They miraculously survived, for the entire city of Chengqing had disappeared from the face of the earth. Well, as for the specific situation, Isuvena only had to wait for the guys to come to their senses to ask them about the situation. Chu Yang step by step began to recover. He lay in the healing water for half an hour, and he opened his eyes with difficulty. The prince felt that he could not move, as if his body were bound by innumerable threads, and each of these threads seemed to convey something to him. It was a pleasant sensation. This body of water conveyed warmth to him like he was on a paradise island. Chu Yang had never felt such warmth before. He was even beginning to feel like he had reached the next stage. The servants were watching Chu Yang and began to notice that he was absorbing their qi, so they tried to quickly block it. They were failing, their forces were weakening, they needed reinforcements. But would they have time to run after him if the process was already unstoppable? The energy in Chu Yang's body, just like this water around him, was gushing out like a fountain. He gathered all the qi into himself as much as he could. The power of this energy was so strong that it didn't fit in one room, its light spreading around, illuminating everything in the radius. It was felt not only by the one standing next to him, but also by those far away. But what it really was, they had yet to find out. The clan disciples were very excited, running everywhere, trying to find any of the elders to inform them of what had happened. At last they found the masters and hurried to report the fellow the patriarch had brought. Chu Yang had already advanced to the next stage many times while he was in the medicinal spring. He was currently at the 5th stage of the meridian formation dimension. Although the old man had a poor memory, he remembered that the young man was at the 6th stage. But that wasn't all. As soon as the prince broke through to the next stage, his wounds were completely healed. The doctors couldn't quite figure out what his physiology was. Master thought it was very strange, including the instantaneous healing. And Xiaoe was not wrong when he said that Chu Yang was an interesting guy. About what had happened, Sima Feng could only guess. But in any case, now he knew that his friend had recovered, and he could take it easy, and he had other things to do. So he had to say goodbye. Xiaoe suggested that the young man take his time and stay for a while, but Sima Feng had 2 important things to do. The guy said goodbye, but who knows, maybe they'll meet again someday. Seeing Sima Feng disappear right in front of them, the master kept puzzling over who this guy was. Xiaoe had seen what he knew about, and he didn't know much, only that this guy was from Bai's family. But the old man himself had never met him 10 years ago, although he might have forgotten him. But the old man was interested in his skill. He was the first person in 200 years that he had met and failed to recognize. The younger brother believed it was because he had a very low skill level, and it was nothing special. Such a theory could not be discarded, but still, Xiaoe decided to look at Chu Yang first. After all, his physiology had aroused the old man's curiosity. But before that, the elder brother instructed the younger brother to gather all the subordinates for a meeting. The old man also tried to ask Ping-er if those 2 guests had come to their senses or not. Ping-er had been watching them, so he could see that their qi was still recovering. In any case, Xiaoe wanted to examine them. The younger brother ordered the rest of the disciples to return to their training. After all, these matters didn't concern them, and they shouldn't get involved in this, something they didn't even argue about. Meanwhile, the tall man was waiting for someone at the Mystic Moon clan. Quickly enough, Sima Feng appeared, who had actually rushed over to him. Sima hurriedly told his interlocutor what he had learned. Chu Yang was the elder brother of the crowned prince of Nan Yuan, Chu Xing. But far more interesting was the fact that Chu Yan's wounds were instantly healed. And in this world, there were only 2 types of physiology that was capable of such a thing. The first was Athanasia's physiology, and the second was the physiology of a true dragon. Sima Feng didn't care about his physiology. Chu Yan was still the decisive figure for them to win the war that was important to him. The interlocutor was finally convinced that Chu Yang was exactly who they were looking for. But now they had to make preparations. They could not allow such a person to join the Mystic Moon sect. That old man from the sect had reached the very last stage of the spiritual dimension. And if Chu Yang joined them, it would complicate their plan. Sima Feng believed that in the future, they could allow Chu Yan to join the destroyed Star Tower. They were weaker, and this was one of the easiest options for them to infiltrate. This was something that Sima's interlocutor decided to do. It seemed to him that it was quite doable for him. And also, he was willing to do anything to make sure that Chu Yan's future was clearly defined. Over a period of time, the doctors from the healing spring moved Chu Yan to a quiet room. He was still lying unconscious, but his condition was better than before. The healing spring was really good. The patriarch decided not to disturb the boy, not only because he wasn't awake yet, but because Chu Yang continued to cultivate even while unconscious. Ye Xuan decided to leave but promised to return when that young man woke up. Before he left, the patriarch ordered everyone that they should not disturb Chu Yang right now. By then, the younger brother had already gathered everyone for the meeting as Ye Xuan had requested. The useless old geezer had brought them all together today because of two important issues. One of them was already afraid that this was another game of hide-and-seek. But Ye Xuan awkwardly rubbed the back of his head as if remembering his recent deeds and said no. The first issue was the city of Changqing. This time, 9 great communities were invited to the sect selection in Changqing, but a terrible tragedy occurred. One man wiped out an entire town, causing the event to be cut short. The elders couldn't believe their ears. This was truly a disaster, for surely all the people of the city had died there. But that was why Ye Xuan wanted to ask the elders to send their disciples to swiftly search for and help the survivors. Without any hesitation, the elders agreed to the elder teacher's request. It was what they would have done anyway. The second question was about next year's state meeting. The once-in-100 years meeting was just around the corner. It was there that the heads of the 9 sects would be chosen for the next period. The one who becomes the head will lead the other 8 sects. But the elders were very angry about the fact that the Mystic Moon sect had never yet held the position of sect head. He had to calm the masters down, because that's exactly what he wanted to say. They might have a huge opportunity next year, and the old man's deception was precisely to prepare for that situation. One of the masters was beginning to guess what the elder brother was getting at, and when he realized his guess, he realized how surprising Ye Xuan was. If everyone understood the patriarch correctly, they now had to make sure that as many people as possible would know about the old man's resurrection, and it would be best if the entire sect knew about it. No one asked unnecessary questions, then everything was clear without them, so the patriarch ended the meeting. Everyone immediately disappeared, but the older sister remained at the table. Ye Xuan immediately realized that something was wrong. Sis reminded him that it had been 70 years since he had faked his death. Then she asked another question. How much he had, in total, spent on mortal martial arts dimensions, meridian formation, elemental DI, boundless heaven dimension. Ye Xuan thought for a bit, remembering that they had good abilities when they were young, if you counted it like that. It all took her 60 years. Sis recalled that it only took her 10 years to advance to the immortal level. The elder's abilities were astounding, but nothing could compare to her younger brother's achievements. Now that they had met again, Ye Xuan, about 10 years old, had reached the spiritual dimension. The woman said this with good intentions, but it seemed like a taunt to his brother. He did not want to hide it, for his condition was frightening him more and more every day. His body was like a black hole. When he cultivated, he always didn't have enough qi. He also felt as if this hole was gradually sucking him in. The price of moving to the spiritual dimension was, a cultivator was constantly on the verge of life and death. At times, Ye Xuan felt that he was not the one to whom the ancestors had predicted a successful awakening through the void of the soul. It had already been so many years, but the patriarch still believed in the prophecy left behind by the ancestors. It might be false, but Ye Xuan was certain that the pure jade physiology of the ancestors was capable of reaching the highest level of emptiness, and they couldn't be wrong. This was another reason why Ye Xuan had so much faith in Miao Ran. He was convinced that she was the future of the Mystic Moon sect, and would be able to surpass the spiritual void. Miao Ran was the hope of the Mystic Moon sect. Therefore, Ye Xuan didn't hesitate to ask her older sister to train her as well. The woman immediately agreed, but she was also worried about her younger brother's condition. That mattered a lot too. Sister didn't know what the future held for the Mystic Moon sect, but she knew that it would be hard for them without the patriarch. so she asked Yi Xuan to take care of himself, if only for the sake of the sect. The patriarch promised that he would take care of his body. He basically agreed with his elder sister. When she had nothing more to say, with her younger brother's permission, she decided to leave. Ye Xuan exhaled a sigh of relief. He had decided that he would not fight anymore, and generally thought that the future belonged to Chu Yang and Miao Ran, and other young people like them. 3 days have passed since Ye Xuan visited our hero. He finally woke up. Chu Yang didn't realize where he was, so he hurriedly went outside to assess the situation. At first, he thought that he was in Brother Shima's sect, but he did not even have time to ask anything about it, as those who were guarding him immediately decided to take him to the patriarch, because he was waiting for him. But who was the patriarch? Chu Yang did not know what to think. The man refused to answer his questions, considering them pointless, as Chu Yang would now go to the eastern main hall and find out for himself there. There was nothing to do, I just had to silently go and meet this patriarch. He walked in the right direction, until he heard the men talking about Miao Ran, who had been spotted in the sect's courtyard. Chu Yang was interested in the conversation, so he stopped to listen. The men kept talking about the girl, about how beautiful she was and how she was nothing special. And here was actually Lin Miao Ran. Fate never failed to bring her lifelines together with Chu Yang. Surely everyone would like to have Miao Ran as their girlfriend or even wife. Chu Yang decided to waste no time and approach her. Only the other guys didn't appreciate it. They didn't understand who Chu Yang was and why he was being so disrespectful to their little sister. But if Chu Yang told them all about it, he would surely give them a heart attack. He turned all his attention to himself and said that Miao Ran would be his girlfriend. Only while he was talking about it, someone was hitting on Miao Ran, suggesting that she become his girlfriend because then she would have a successful life. This guy had many things that would help her with her cultivation. Miao Ran didn't react to this in any way and still more or less politely asked to get off her back. But apparently this guy had never been turned down by anyone. Everyone knew that Lan Xiao always got what he wanted. Therefore, he once again advised Miao Ran to stop, or else she would regret it very much. Lan Xiao was still a tyrant, and it wasn't a rumor. Everyone knew about it. Therefore, this guy annoyed Miao Wounds, especially those running eyes, sly appearance. She couldn't stand that kind of thing. And his ugliness was okay, but his combat merit was worthless at all. If Miao Ran refused Lan Xiao's offer, he promised to make her life difficult. Going against the Mystic Moon sect and this prince could not end well. Miao Ran couldn't even control objects, and yet she was still flying in the clouds. That was why Lan Xiao decided to show the girl what true strength was. Lan Xiao shamelessly sent the balls straight at the girl he had sworn his love to a few minutes ago. Miao Ran didn't even do anything. Chu Yang did everything for her, once again saving her from some danger. Those watching were amazed at Chu Yang's courage, who was not afraid to go against Lan Xiao, who was apparently a local authority. Maybe he wasn't afraid of him because he didn't even know anything about him. He only knew about himself. Chu Yang, that others have never even heard of. But they could look at the young master himself. Chu Yang had to punish Lan Xiao's men who didn't even manage to defend themselves to begin with. Lan Xiao was furious because these were the people who usually helped him with everything and could stand up for him among other things. Chu Yang didn't care at all. And in fact, this goose was talking too much. He needed to shut his mouth. In fact, Chu Yang had a lot on his mind. First, he was looked down upon by a merchant in the market. Then he was chased by an assassin sent by his younger brother, and it really hurt him. Lan Xiao was also on edge, but he continued to listen to Chu Yang, trying to find out what he was getting at. Still, Chu Yang was able to let go of the past, but Lan Xiao daring to lay eyes on his girlfriend was too much. He must have had enough of life. Lan Xiao still didn't quiet down. He decided to clarify that he always got what he wanted. And from this moment on, Miao Ran was no longer Chu Yang's girlfriend, because he decided so. These pointless conversations were tiring our hero, so he simply used the Raging Dragon's grip to deal with this rascal. Whether Lan Xiao was still alive or not was nobody's concern. Chu Yang was curious about Miao Ran. What did he expect? Maybe the girl would throw herself into his arms, or even kiss him on the cheek. All his expectations shattered like a glass. Our beau failed to please the lady. So instead of a warm hug, he received a cold slap. Chu Yang didn't understand why, but Miao Ran simply hated him and it seemed to be sincere. After all, because of Chu Yang, enemies had come to the city and thanks to him, the girl now had no home. And what made Miao Ran the most angry was the fact that Chu Yang was not Chu Yang. The real Chu Yang was a scholar, not a prince. And our prince isn't her fiancé, he's just a liar. Chu Yang tried to explain something, but the girl didn't want to hear anything. She didn't even want to know who Chu Yang really was. Yes, he had saved her once. But then he had immediately deceived her, so they couldn't have anything in common. Today, Miao Ren came to him to tell him that she no longer wanted to see Chu Yan in the Mystic Moon sect. He could leave. The girl left. But without even turning around, Chu Yang asked her for forgiveness, and admitted that he had indeed deceived her. The patriarch was sitting nearby and saw and heard all of this. For some reason he decided to support Chu Yang so that he would not be discouraged. After all, everything would be fine. Chu Yang still couldn't understand who he had the honor of speaking to. The old man in his manner only chuckled, and introduced himself that he was the patriarch of the Mystic Moon sect. Therefore, out of Chu Yang's permission, Xiaoe wanted to lead him to a more suitable place to talk. The old man claimed that he would help sort out the young man's emotional traumas. The last two words sounded strange to Chu Yang. He couldn't understand when he had gotten to this point. To still have injuries in his emotions, but of course, he agreed to follow the patriarch. They went into a spacious but dark room. The old man apologized in advance for the mess. Xiaoe felt that the prince should have known who was after him. The patriarch started from afar, but Chu Yang didn't know such a person who had massacred Mount Sang, so it didn't explain much to him. He was more interested in knowing how he ended up here. The old man didn't hide it, telling it as it was, that he was brought here by a young man named Shima Feng. Yet Xiaoe once again decided to revisit the previous topic, and suggested that we think together. Why was a cultivator of the boundless heaven dimension hunting Chu Yang? The story was a long one, so Chu Yang decided to only tell the highlights. Once again, he had to confess that he was the elder brother of Nan Yuan's crown prince Chu Xing, and was also the former crown prince Chu Yan. Now Xiaoe, this explained everything. Why a cultivator of the boundless heaven dimension was after him. After all, Chu Yang was not a commoner, but a royal bloodline. Suddenly, Chu Yang decided to wonder where this mercenary could still be and whether he had something to fear in the future. But there was no need to fear that mercenary anymore, for that useless old man had sent him on a long flight. Chu Yang assumed that the old man was also a cultivator of the boundless heavenly dimension, but his level was actually above that dimension. Xiaoe noticed that Chu Yang was interested in these things and wanted to know what the level after the heaven dimension was. But he would have plenty of time after he joined the Mystic Moon sect. He might have been happy to join the sect, but the recent conversation couldn't be ignored by him. For Miao Ran's sake, he felt that it would be better for him to leave the sect. The old man was far from these matters of love, so he didn't understand why Chu Yang would abandon the Mystic Moon sect so easily. Chu Yan spoke straightforwardly, for he was ashamed to look into Miao Ran's eyes, for he had deceived her. It was asked if it wasn't easier to just apologize to her, but Chu Yan was somehow sure that she wouldn't want to listen to him. In a way, the patriarch understood the guy, because he had known the girl since she was a child. Even at that age, Miao Ran was very proud. Unfortunately, the old man was powerless in this situation. It was one thing for a guy to deceive her, but the girl had lost her house for him. But the old man thought that the prince wasn't the only one to blame, and there was no need to take it personally. Our hero realized that perhaps he was not the only one to blame, but he thought that he was not worthy to be seen by this girl anymore. Only the patriarch didn't want to let a talented fighter like Chu Yang go. Therefore, he proposed the following. If the prince won sparring with Xiaoe, who would then be able to leave? The offer was unusual, and Chu Yan felt fear mixed with anticipation. To prevent those eyes from still being filled with fear, the old man promised that he would only fight with one hand. Chu Yang should have thought of it as a training session to overcome his pain. The prince remained silent and did not answer, apparently thinking. But during this time, the patriarch had already guessed that the young man was afraid. It could be said that Chu Yang had reassured the old man, because of course he was willing. When else would he have the opportunity to duel with a spirit dimension cultivator? Chu Yang had his own plans, and he wanted to return home for revenge. He also had a second goal, which was to defeat all the experts. The prince wanted to build a new world on the continent. The young man didn't know how many Xiaoe-like experts there were in this world, but that didn't matter to him. If he wasn't going to prove his worth in this world, what other purpose could he have? In that case, the useless old man was even more eager to face Chu Yan in a duel. So he suggested we go downstairs to the special sparring room. The useless old man always kept his word. He only used one hand, so if he could do something with his other hand, it could be considered Xiaoe had lost. Before the duel was about to begin, then Chu Yan decided to ask about what level the patriarch was after all. Xiaoe was in no hurry to answer the question. He He didn't understand what could change in this situation if Chu Yang recognized his level. Could it be that he was really scared? The answer surprised the young man, so he apologized for his rudeness and took his words back. And since the questions were over, the old man suggested we begin. In any case, Chu Yang promised that he would not be ceremonious with him. The prince was eerily curious as to what kind of strength it was still possible to defeat a cultivator of the boundless heaven dimension with. This was probably the reason why Chu Yang had agreed to duel to know a higher level. Chu Yang used his favorite strike in the fight, the raging dragon grab. It was not a bad striking technique. This punch was also normal as Xiaoe assessed it, but so far, neither punch had caused him any damage. While Chu Yang was dabbling, then Xiaoe decided to show off his punch. But just in time enough, the prince managed to bounce away. The patriarch had to admit that this little guy was strong enough to make a strong cultivator. Chu Yang had the perfect opportunity to attack from behind, but for some reason, he chose to attack from the front. For him, let's just say it was part of a strategy. So far, the old man hadn't even used a single hand or even chi to resist Chu Yang in any way. Was this really all our hero could do? But Xiaoe shouldn't jump to conclusions or underestimate the prince. He was just waiting for the right moment to get closer to his opponent. This was the moment he had been biding his time in order to more effectively apply the Raging Dragon Strike. He managed to make a strike, but the old man easily escaped, staying in the same place, just twisting in the air. But this strike was flexible. The patriarch had to additionally use his Xiaoe to defend himself, or else he would probably be dead by now. During this time, while Xiaoe was reasoning with Chu Yang's attack, he hid up above. As fast as possible, he approached his opponent to show how strong he was, but his hand couldn't even touch the old man's face. It was a body defense that used chi. Our hero probably hadn't heard of it, but even if he had, it was still too late. Chu Yang retaliated, and was already lying on the floor, unable to get up quickly. And after all, the useless old man had only used 1% of his power. Chu Yang was still lying down. The patriarch had time to even think that the fellow had given up. He probably needed to temper his character. The prince was still lying there, trying to move at least a finger, which he gave with difficulty. And the patriarch was already heading for the exit, as he thought the guy had really given up. Chu Yang felt like he was once again in this heavenly place he had once been to. This was where he drew his strength. The prince looked around, wanting to memorize this landscape, but someone started calling his name. Behind him was a huge dragon, asking if he remembered him. Chu Yang knew him perfectly well, but he needed to see him again to awaken his strength, to remember his source of strength. The old man stopped as he felt a powerful surge of chi. Chu Yang was now a meridian formation dimension cultivator. The old man had lived as long as he had, but he couldn't imagine that the chi could be so strong. He had never seen anything like this in his life. Suddenly, Chu Yang disappeared right in front of Xiaoe's eyes. But in the same second, he appeared behind his back, punching him from behind. Chu Yang has managed to break through Xiaoe's ki and hooked it lightly. It was no longer the same harmless boy. His eyes sparked differently. Chu Yang resembled a wild beast, precisely a dragon that had been raging inside of him, but had now broken out. If you remember, earlier Xiaoe had wondered what this boy's physiology was after all. So now he had no doubt that Chu Yang was the possessor of true dragon physiology. This guy's punches were getting faster and stronger, because they were filled with chi, not just physical strength. No longer could the old man stand still and do nothing as before. Now he had to dodge the fierce blows. The battle stopped in earnest, and gained more momentum. Chu Yang's strikes and grabs were not only strong, but also filled with confidence. He managed to grab hold of the patriarch's leg, and then throw him against the wall. Xiaoe once again hugged the wall, but he was not at all upset about it. On the contrary, he was glad that the guy didn't give up. Still, Chu Yang was an interesting guy to Xiaoe. He even managed to break through the old man's defense. Chu Yang had completely immersed himself in this fight. All of his strength he was focusing solely on attacks and battle tactics. He didn't even chat with the old man like he had done before. The battle promised to be heated, so Xiaoe himself began to take it more seriously than before. Everyone could hear the carnage from outside, debris of the building flying from the training hall, for there wasn't enough room in the hall for such strong cultivators. Younger brother had seen these two ki once before, and one of them, he knew for sure, belonged to his older brother. It was very surprising to him, though, that the patriarch had already reached the dimension of spiritual emptiness. Who the second arrow belonged to, the master did not know, but it seemed weaker to him. The servant suggested that all this fighting was going on near the patriarch's room itself, so the master decided to go there and watch. It all sounded like a very violent fight was going on in there. The younger brother didn't know what to think, so he decided not to guess for long, and opened the gate immediately. But the next thing he saw shocked him. Looks like his big brother will shock him many times over. The half-naked Xiaoe once again gained the upper hand in the battle, something that Chu Yang was extremely displeased and even angry about. The old man was only too happy to talk to this guy about being a good boy and not getting up. The younger brother was literally dumbfounded when he saw his older brother. It had been a long time since he had seen the old man fight anyone. Xiaoe immediately turned his attention to his younger brother as soon as he noticed him. I had to explain that they were here doing some friendly sparring with this young man. It was not a serious fight, but the patriarch learned that the young man had true dragon physiology. Little brother understood the risks of this, for if Chu Yang really possessed true dragon physiology, it could be a grand discovery for the mystic moon sect. In this time, while Chu Yang was lying down and the elders were chatting, he had already managed to recover. You'd think the prince had lost, but there were still rules. And the patriarch had just pinned Chu Yang's head with his left hand. That means he lost. Little brother didn't understand what they were talking about. Xiaoe had to explain that he was obligated to let Chu Yang go since he had defeated him, so they could not detain him in the sect. Chu Yang was glad that he had such great luck. After all, he still had business to attend to, and he couldn't linger in the sect. Defeat is defeat. The old man kept his word, and our hero could go wherever he wanted. Xiaoe will not stop him. Chu Yang thanked Patriarch for this fight, as he gained tremendous experience through this fight. The Patriarch had already been brought new clothes, for the old ones were tattered. He was about to leave, but he still thought that Chu Yang was a smart guy, and knew all the privileges of the Mystic Moon sect. It was probably not just because of Miao Wound that Chu Yang decided to leave them. Xiaoe was absolutely right. The prince had a bigger reason. He saw right through him. Chu Yang wasn't leaving the sect just because of the girl. He had already made up his mind long ago. The Mystic Moon sect was indeed a beautiful place, but it would not remain peaceful and tranquil if Chu Yang stayed here. If that happened, the stability of the sect would be broken forever. That's why he didn't want to let that happen. But Xiaoe was convinced that the prince did not need to worry about it, as he could handle it himself. Since it was Chu Yang's problem, he wanted to deal with it himself, not wanting to involve third parties. Chu Yang was young and determined, just as the old man had imagined. He understood him, so he let him do as he saw fit. Meanwhile, Miao Ran was sitting in her chambers, as if contemplating the recent events and trying to come to terms with reality. But she was brought out of this state by a maid. It informed her that Chu Yang was leaving the sect. Miao Ran was somehow very surprised and alarmed by this. Perhaps then she had blurted out those words out of anger. But Chu Yang had already packed all his belongings and was preparing to descend the mountain. And yet, for some reason, the girl did not remain indifferent, still continued to be interested in him. The maid assumed that the young master was now crossing the mountain gate. Miao Ran couldn't wait any longer. She saw fit to catch up with the prince. The girl didn't even wait for her maid, rushing over to Chu Yan herself. Meanwhile, the prince was already descending the stairs. He walked leisurely. He left the place with ease. He knew he was doing the right thing, but the stairs seemed too long to him. He didn't even know where he should go afterward when he descended the mountain. Chu Yan had made that sacred vow before descending, but now he had no idea where he should go. While he was standing there thinking, Miao Ran appeared in front of him and stopped him. That was the last person Chu Yang expected to see. That was how he thought she had a grudge against him. Miao Ran was angry that this asshole decided to leave, to run away so brazenly after committing a crime like this. Chu Yang was discouraged after all. The girl herself had recently told him to leave the sect, and now right in front of him was saying otherwise. But did he really want to leave just because Miao Ran told him to? What kind of man was he after that? A common coward. Chu Yang paused for a bit, and then moved closer to Miao Ran, who was watching in surprise then what he was about to do. Shortening the distance between them, Chu Yang whispered a question in her ear. Had she already regretted breaking up with her fiancé? Who would have thought that such an innocent question would make her blush? In order for no one to see this, Miao Ran once again retaliated with a strong slap to Chu Yang, as if she didn't understand what that rascal was talking about just now. Chu Yang innocently explained to her that once he finished what he had to do, he would immediately return and marry her. Miao Ran kept resenting who would want to marry Chu Yang. It definitely wasn't her. The prince kept saying that their wedding had already been planned. But there was one nuance. Chu Yang was not the real groom. Yet, it was for the sake of this wedding that he had defeated Ye Chen, and this was an undeniable fact. But the girl wouldn't settle for that, and it didn't count at all. Only to Chu Yang, it didn't matter. Miao Ran couldn't contradict his agreement with her parents. The girl had nothing more to say in response. When their conversation ended, a maid came running in. The master walked away, and the two girls looked after him. Miao Ran persistently thought about him, for she had no idea how many other secrets Chu Yan had. She whispered this aloud, but the maid did not hear, and when she asked again, the mistress was silent. However, there was no point in lingering. They decided to return to their chambers. Chu Yan continued on his way like this. He walked down the steps and next, a huge forest opened up in front of him. He was already being waited for. The tall man did not even expect Chu Yan to willingly descend down the mountain. And after all, he had to take time to prepare, but as Shima Feng pointed out, it wasn't even necessary. However, this version of events was also factored into their plan. Shima, all with a smile, remarked how thoughtful his comrade was. He has calculated all the moves and prepared alternative plans. After some time, Chu Yang had finally reached the nearest city. Nearby, they were selling sesame buns. During this time, Chu Yan had managed to get hungry, so he wanted to buy one. While he was pulling out his money, someone shoved him, either on purpose or by accident. This was just a gawker who was rushing to the great sect recording he was in such a hurry to see. When the prince looked around, he saw the huge crowd that was apparently standing for this entry. In the middle of this crowd, a girl was passionately talking about the sect. The Tower of the Fallen Star sect was an established great cultivation sect. All disciples lived in harmony and were trained one-on-one by renowned masters. Also, this sect did not have such strict rules as compared to other sects. Anyone who wanted to could become a disciple of the Tower of the Fallen Star sect. This place was about 35 kilometers away from the Mystic Moon sect. It was very bold of them to come here and try to recruit people. Among the crowd, the girl noticed Chu Yang. She approached him with a smile. She felt that this gentleman's skeletal structure was perfectly suited for cultivation. Perhaps he should have considered an offer to join the Fallen Star sect. The girl could confidently state that given Chu Yang's skeletal structure, he was doing a crime when he refused to cultivate. But what Chu Yang was thinking about was this. If he joined the Great Cultivation sect, he would be constantly controlled and would not be able to take care of personal matters. The girl seemed to read his mind. She explained that the Great Sect was different from others, in that if someone joined them, as long as it was not against the laws, no one interfered in the personal affairs of the disciples. This sounded very tempting. Chu Yang began to seriously wonder. Were they not lying? The girl proved her words by saying that they were near the Mystic Moon sect. And if they were deceivers, they would have been destroyed long ago. Chu Yang pondered. After all, if the Great Sect would not interfere with his affairs, then joining it might not be a bad option. Besides, members of one of the great sects had taken his maid Xiaoe, and joining the sect could help him find her. The girl waited patiently for Chu Yan to consider her proposal, and finally the prince gave out that he was agreeable to such terms. In that case, he should follow the girl for further processing. She led him to the registration desk where there was a crowd of people. It was very surprising, but the girl suggested that she could tell them to register Chu Yang first without waiting in line. Lan Tian sat boredly at his workstation, and when the girl asked him to register, he sighed heavily. It was as if the man had seen Chu Yan before, so he was not surprised that he had appeared here. After all, he had a huge cultivation base. Now he had to fill out a questionnaire. He had to give his name, gender, place of birth, and family members, and then go through and test his power on the sphere. Chu Yang remembered that the sphere was exactly the same as the one in the underground arena, so he didn't look at it for a long time and immediately touched it. The sphere shone with a bright, dazzling light that made people have to close their eyes. 2 golden stripes could be seen on it. This was the second stage of the D-element dimension. Chu Yan was advancing in levels so fast that he was not even surprised at his current level. He had never even thought that he would be able to enter the di-elemental dimension, which he didn't even know about before. The girl's intuition didn't fail her. She obviously knew who she needed to approach. After a few seconds, Chu Yang still began to realize that he had the second stage of the D-elemental dimension after all, and he hadn't even realized it. On the other hand, it could be because the glyph on his hand was increasing his power, and he was also becoming clearer, and the girl kept cheering that she had managed to recruit such a strong cultivator. Now she felt even more certain that Chu Yang should have joined the Fallen Star Tower sect. In that case, Chu Yan wanted to know more about this sect. The Tower of the Fallen Star is one of the 7 great sects of the Yao Aojiang country. Because it is located on a high remote mountain, right next to where the stars fall, it got its name. Long Tian asked Shenping to hurry up and organize a safe route for the new member of the Shooting Star Tower sect. But first, Shenping decided to take Chu Yang to the inn. After a long journey, the prince finally rested in a secluded room and reflected on the recent events. He had never imagined that as soon as he left the Mystic Moon sect, he would immediately join the Tower of the Fallen Star sect. In the morning, Shenping knocked on his door, with the news that it was already time to leave. Apparently the road had been laid out. We needed to hit the road. Upon arrival, a huge castle and a picturesque view flaunted before our hero. Such was the appearance of the tower sect of the Fallen Star. Rumors had already spread about Chu Yang throughout the sect. He was known as the most talented rookie. The disciples truly admired him. The prince was very young and was able to comprehend great cultivation power at such a young age. None of the disciples had ever imagined that someone so strong would enter the Shooting Star Tower sect. It was cultivation time right now, but for some reason, everyone had gathered here, probably to gawk at this talented rookie. In order to prevent the other disciples from embarrassing Chu Yang with too much attention, Shenping decided to take him to the guest room. The only thing that confused our hero was that there were few talented fighters here. Great sects should have a lot of them, but the strongest ones here are the fighters of the Meridian Formation dimension. And there were even people who were still at the martial arts dimension stage. Was this sect exactly fine? How could it be in the top sects if they were so surprised by a master of the boundless heaven dimension? The sect seemed to be recruiting absolutely all fighters, but what was the point? If there were such weak cultivators, then what could our hero learn here? Except to use this sect for his own purposes. Even Sister Shenping seemed to have a high position in the sect, yet was at the level of changing Meridian Formation. Her level was not far from Chu Yang's level. While Sis still hadn't left yet, then Chu Yang decided to ask her his question. Were those people external disciples? Shenping awkwardly answered as if she was embarrassed about it herself, but she had to say that most of them were outer disciples, and some were direct disciples. Chu Yang could not believe what was being said. After all, the patriarch of the Mystic Moon sect had told him that the boundless heaven dimension was not the limit yet, and even the minor pawns of the Mystic Moon sect were at the second stage of the Meridian Formation dimension. And here, the strongest ones had only reached the Meridian Formation dimension. Chu Yang finally realized that he had joined the fake Great Sect, but there was still nowhere to go. The prince had no lodgings of his own and had little money, and here at least he was given a good room with all the comforts of home. And besides, if he needed anything, he could let Shenping know, and she would provide him with whatever he needed. The girl also explained that the sect patriarch had gone on business and would only return in 3 days, so she had to ask Chu Yan to wait for the patriarch for 2 more days. For someone as busy as Chu Yan, 3 days was a lot, but he decided that he would spend this time in isolation cultivating anyway. So he asked that no one disturb him the whole time. Since our hero had joined the Great Sect, he felt it was proper to hurry up and refine his strength. He found himself back in Nirvana Tower. His transition was very smooth, not like previous times. Or maybe he was just used to it. Chu Yang had broken through to the 5th stage of the Meridian Formation dimension in the blink of an eye. He only had 1 step left before the DI element dimension. Previously, he had shown the strength of the D element measurement. He was eerily curious to know what the test results would be now. He wanted to take this opportunity to check out what was on the next floor after all. As he climbed the steps, he noticed that the door was still sealed. But he still decided to try and see if his current strength would be enough to open this door. Chu Yang gently touched with one hand and the seal gave in to him. Without any trouble, he entered the room where he saw a tabletop with a book that had apparently new technology in it. The prince picked up the book, and before he could even open it or read the title, the entire contents of the book began to flow into his mind. This information flowed throughout her body. She left her knowledge and muscle memory wherever she could use it. This technique was indeed unusual, and it was called a technique for physical cultivation. And from what was written in the book, physiology was not only an innate uniqueness, but they could also be obtained through cultivation. Moreover, it was a celestial body cultivation technique. The special physiology obtained from her could not be weaker than the one obtained at birth. Athanasia's celestial physiology will allow our hero to become invulnerable to normal celestial weapons, as well as recover quickly from injury. However, in order to use this technique, Chu Yang must move to the DI element dimension. Chu Yan only confirmed his intentions. He really needed to hurry up with his cultivation and level up. And now that he had cultivated the physiology of celestial Athanasia, adding to that the dragon energy inside his body, his current power would become much stronger than others at the same stage. It seemed like it would be so much easier to accomplish goals now, or did it just seem that way? Chu Yang cultivated and saw himself returning everything that was taken away from him. He wasn't going to give anything to anyone for nothing. The prince was in the pagoda for 6 days, and given the difference with real time, there should now be 1 day left before the patriarch returns. So our hero decided to go out and look around. Maybe he will notice something else interesting. But as soon as he stepped out, he was blinded by the sun, and he didn't even see some guy with books pass by. Only his shouting for Chu Yang to get out of the way could be heard. And then all the books fell to the floor, and the guy himself took a bit of a hit too. With some sort of pretension, the guy was addressing Chu Yang, trying to elicit who he was.
You stood in his way and didn't even do anything.
But this situation seemed funny to our hero, because it was not he who crashed into the stranger, and the one in him. Yet, he still thought Chu Yang was at fault. After all, he had shouted at him to go away before. The guy didn't stop there. He continued to complain about how much work he had, and now he was simply distracted. He had to do the laundry, clean everywhere, and deliver the paperwork before he finished cleaning. How was he supposed to do that? And now Chu Yang had added even more trouble for him. The prince didn't want to listen to this twaddle, so he agreed with the stranger's words, and apologized for running out in front of him. He wanted to finish his conversation and walked past the stranger, but the man stopped him. The guy didn't like the way Chu Yang apologized to him. He thought that apology wasn't sincere. Okay, but what else did the kid want Chu Yang to do? The stranger's requests were certainly royal, even though he wasn't even a prince. And what he wanted next was for Chu Yang to bow to him as an apology, and then pick up all those books. Chu Yang understood that the worker in front of him was an ordinary worker. But since when did all such workers in the great sects become so arrogant? This boy was even more hurt by Chu Yang's words. He was displeased that the prince looked down on the common laborers. Therefore, he demonstrated our hero the third stage of the die-element dimension, something that Chu Yang clearly didn't expect. And this guy looked younger than him? All the people he had met before in this sect only had a meridian formation dimension. He never thought he could cross paths with a genius like this guy, so he had to admit that he did look down on him. But it was for the best. After all, 2 days ago, Chu Yang would not have been able to compare to him. But now he had already reached the 5th stage of the meridian formation dimension, so it was yet to be decided whether he would win or not. Chu Yang was saying all this under his breath. The guy didn't even really hear anything, so he repeated, "Will they fight or not?" Of course, the prince agreed, for it was the perfect chance for him to test his current level of strength. Without any rage, but with utmost seriousness, the prince and the worker lunged at each other, wanting to test who was stronger. Their squabbling could be heard throughout the clan. People were not left wondering what could be going on there. And the fight of these two was just beginning, and neither of them were going to give in to the other. One could say that their forces were equal, and now it was clear why this worker was so bold. He was strong enough to punish anyone who wasn't polite to him. But sometimes it got absurd, like now. Still, the guy recognized that Chu Yang was really strong since he could resist a D-dimension cultivator. Their strengths were roughly at the same level, so the stranger had to move on to more serious action. But this only showed our hero that this worker's physiology was exactly the same as his. When the guy said he was embarking on a more serious endeavor, he wasn't kidding, as he got even faster. Chu Yang didn't even have time to catch the moment he rose up and already saw him in the heights. And then, he was thrown back. Well, this guy almost hit Chu Yang, but that didn't mean he lost. The guy kept attacking our hero. He was about to punch Chu Yang's nose. But at this moment, Shen Ping intervened, who was perplexed as to what was even happening here. The guy had to stop like that because they obviously weren't expecting any more spectators here. But in the clan, fighting anywhere was not allowed. There were special places for that. Chu Yang explained the situation as it was. They were figuring out who was stronger here. But this kind of answer the guy didn't like. So he decided to tell his own, that Chu Yang, a bastard like that, had crashed into him. And he, poor guy, dropped all his belongings because of him. And Chu Yang's apology was completely insincere. After the massacre, the books were just scraps. The boy almost fainted when he saw what had happened to them. But he didn't do it on purpose. And by the way, Shen Ping was waiting for this guy to get serious. It didn't matter though. It was outside students' homework anyway, so the guy could just tell them to redo it. He was glad he hadn't been reprimanded by his older sister, so he tried to flee the scene as quickly as possible. Shen Ping continued talking to Chu Yang. She didn't expect him to come out of isolation so quickly. However, he didn't expect it himself. But he was able to refine his power faster than expected. Apparently it was a natural talent, because who else could level up in just 2 days? In that case, Shen Ping wanted to know where Chu Yang was planning to go now. At this point he'd come out just to look around, and then this kind of trouble came out. Realizing that the boy had no special plans, the girl suggested that the prince attend the welcoming ceremony for the new students. Usually, such ceremonies were accompanied under the leadership of the patriarch, so Chu Yang assumed that he had already returned. But not yet, but it was going to be soon, and this ceremony was going to be performed by the elders. Chu Yang really had no plans, so he decided to follow his elder sister and go to the ceremony. Even before reaching the room, one could hear the chattering and cheerful conversations of the sect disciples. When they were at the place, Shenping suggested that the young prince go there by himself, as she had other things to do. Chu Yang was noticed but ignored. It was strange to him, because he was a nobody to this sect, and he had just been let in here. But there were things that could be said here that were not for the ears of outsiders. This community was indeed strange, however. It further confirmed the speculation that the sect was fake. Someone loudly asked to be quiet. Right now, Elder Xiaoting wanted to speak up. All the disciples fell silent in an instant. Xiaoting began his speech by saying that he was very happy that everyone wanted to join the Tower of the Fallen Star sect. He knew that all humans were gifted with the natural talent of a cultivator. Chu Yang was not afraid to speak caustically about it, because with this logic, even a monkey could become a cultivator by accident. But his words were not paid attention to. Xiaoting once again reminded the disciples, just like Shenping earlier, that the Shooting Star Tower sect was quite different from other sects. They didn't have strict rules, though of course there were a few basic standards that students would have to adhere to. The first was not to violate the laws of this country. The second was not to harm the health of fellow students. There was still a third standard, but the students' patience was running out. They didn't realize there would be so many. Chu Yan had left his room back in the morning, but it was already nighttime when he was still listening to Xiaoting. He continued to talk about the sect and talk about his hopes. Finally, when he noticed that the students were tired, he decided to finish his speech. After all, they needed to rest. Chu Yang was simply disgusted. After all, he had stood in the same position all day listening to some old man. He had no idea that the elder would be so verbose. He probably wouldn't have come in here if he had known it would be like this. After all, he felt really bad right now. The prince tried to scramble out of here, but on his way out, Xiaoting called out to him. And by name, he asked him to stay for a few minutes. To be polite, the man turned around with a tired look. Xiaoting praised the young man. After all, he had reached a great level at such a young age. He was getting older and saw the true heroes getting younger and younger. Xiaoting decided to set aside any etiquette and simply inquire about Chu Yang's impressions from his days spent here. Chu Yang didn't complain about anything and thanked the care. But Xiaoting still didn't finish the conversation. He had one thing he wanted to ask, but wasn't sure if now was the right time. Yet our hero, despite his fatigue, was willing to listen to the elder. Xiaoting turns out to have heard that our hero was originally in the Mystic Moon sect, but somehow didn't stay there for long. Extremely dryly, Chu Yang replied that he didn't like being restricted, and here, he was given much more freedom. There were many living quarters to move into, and they were quite far apart from each other. The Tower of the Fallen Star sect seemed to have a really large territory. Chu Yang already needed to check in, and he found a cabin where there seemed to be no one, so he decided to take the opportunity to move in. But as soon as he walked into this lodge, there were still other students who were immediately interested in his dimension. Chu Yang said truthfully that he had the first stage of the lower-level D-element dimension. In response, the man laughed and introduced himself. Chu Yang could call him Big Brother Hao. After all, he had the first stage of the D-element dimension, the highest level. Next, Hao spoke of some rules that Chu Yang knew absolutely nothing about. Hao decided to clarify and offer some advice. Here, the 5 of them had a level above Chu Yang, so the prince should be able to understand his situation. And from then on, he would give them all the spirit stones he would receive, and also help them fulfill the sect's missions. Besides, they were the ones who were still kind right now. But no one knew what would happen here next. In the Tower of the Fallen Star sect, strength decided everything, and no one would know anything if something happened to Chu Yan. Initially, it seemed to our hero that they just wanted to intimidate him, but in fact Hao was just giving him advice, and demanded that the guy give them all the spirit stones he had. Chu Yang was bold, and offered to let those rascals take the stones away from him if they could. Hao instructed his 6 to attack Chu Yang and punish him for this behavior, just not to kill him. Chu Yang still stood still and didn't even move. When the disciple attacked him, he intercepted his fist on the fly, and then squeezed with all the force he could muster that the boy couldn't hold back a cry of pain. Hao himself decided to attack next. It was not according to his plan. He still needed to prove his strength and show that he was the one in charge. Giving himself to Chu Yang was certainly not going to be hurt, so he fought back against his assailant. He realized that even if Hao and the others had a level higher than his level, he would still be stronger due to his physiology and knowledge. When he bet on it, he wasn't wrong for a moment because Hao was defeated. He didn't want to be killed, so he asked Chu Yan to stay away from him. The latter agreed, but there was one condition. Chu Yang wanted to obtain all the spiritual stones that Hao had, and for the next 2 years, he would carry out all of the sect's missions in his place. Otherwise, Chu Yang wouldn't be able to vouch for himself. It was better not to test his patience. Hao couldn't give away all of his spirit stones. After all, they didn't just belong to him, but to others as well. He wanted to say something else, to contradict Chu Yang's words, but he didn't have time, as Chu Yang's foot slammed into his face, throwing his body like a soccer ball straight into the closet. He couldn't and didn't want to hear any bickering. Not here and not now. The other students were no longer so defiant and cowardly with fear as Chu Yang looked at them with side vision. Chu Yang once again demanded the spirit stones, but he only received one small pouch. This was not the case, for he also wanted to obtain the stones that belonged to Wang Hao. They had to give them to him. Chu Yang was of course surprised when he saw the weighty pouch. He had thought that there would be about a dozen or 20 spirit stones in there, but here, it turned out to be over 50. Normally, he also rubbed his nose at the other disciples. The student admitted that these spirit stones, they didn't only belong to Wang Hao, as the student had mentioned earlier, but Chu Yang didn't care about these details at all and didn't need their help. Chu Yang had to explain the new policy since he had already been taken advantage of once, so he knew what hatred and revenge was. And if these guys were sick of living, they could safely repeat this whole situation. The guys repented and apologized because they thought they were wrong and promised never to do it again. It was already night. Everyone was asleep, but Wang Hao was the only one who couldn't sleep. Whether it was from physical pain or from the recent shame, he had stooped to extorting spirit stones because most of the stones from this bag belonged to top-level disciples. Hao had only ascended to the next level of the die-element dimension. His condition had not stabilized yet. Today, he had suffered a huge defeat when Chu Yang had robbed him, but he believed that this was not the end. Chu Yang should have paid him 100 times more for this. He just needed to wait, and he would activate the summoning talisman. But what a pity that Chu Yang was so impatient, and couldn't wait for anything. Wang Hao was once again caught off guard. Chu Yang had once again outplayed him because he was watching that scum with both eyes. This guy could sleep peacefully, but once again he was trying to get even with a cultivator stronger than him. It was obvious that thanks to the summoning talisman, Wang Hao wanted to summon someone to beat up Chu Yang. He denied it, saying that it was not so, and that he had no such evil intentions. So the prince had to push a little harder. Those cries of pain were heard everywhere. The other guys lay quietly and shook with fear, as if they expected the same rotten fate. As long as our hero was not touched, he had no business with anyone. But now, he decided to play enough to make everyone realize this truth. At last morning came. During that night, no one in the room had been able to sleep. They lay in fear and could not sleep a wink. Chu Yang practically destroyed the entire room, but he finally left the room and the guys could at least relax a little. When they looked around, they saw their big brother Hao in a very deplorable state. There wasn't even a living spot on him since Chu Yang had played with him, and now he couldn't even recover. Things were bad. One of the guys decided to leave the room. Chu Yang was acting too brazenly, and he couldn't just leave things alone and wait for him to destroy their cultivation. It was worth it just to look at Wang Hao's condition. The guy thought that if they didn't defend themselves, they would end up just like him. The other guy tried to argue, but no buts could be here. In that pouch, only less than 2/10 of the spirit stones that Chu Yang had stolen belonged to Wang Hao. There was no need to doubt it. Chu Yang had stolen many other people's spirit stones, and thus signed his own death warrant. Therefore, the guy decided to report this incident to his elders, and then soon Chu Yang would realize what trouble awaited him. Meanwhile, Chu Yang decided to pay a visit to the missions office. But there was a problem. Chu Yang had just joined the sect. He had better pay attention to cultivating and raising his rank. Completing the mission would just be a waste of time for him, and he would get almost no participation points, so it wasn't worth it. Chu Yang decided to do things a little differently and give the elder a small thank you. Perhaps now he could find him a suitable mission. In that case, he was indeed willing to help his younger brother. Master assumed that Chu Yang needed something along the lines of a guard in a private area. The Lord began to look over the available missions. Offered one, it was to guard the eastern Li grass fields for a period of 50 days. After completing the mission, Chu Yang would be able to choose any spirit tree in the field, up to 20 years old. In addition to this, he will earn 3 participation points. The eastern Li grass fields are forbidden lands for the sect. Other than the other disciples doing missions there, Chu Yang would not see anyone else. And since this is a time-limited mission, only a few people could undertake it. Once Chu Yang finished accomplishing the mission, he had to return to the office to celebrate the accomplishment of the mission. But he had to remember one thing. If he abandons the mission, or fails to fulfill his duties in the form of protecting the Li fields from wild beasts, the mission will be considered a failure, and the appropriate number of participation points will be deducted from him. According to the terms of this mission, Chu Yang was to patrol the fields. He could spend the rest of his time cultivating. There were only 90 days left until the next combat competition, but with the pagoda, those 90 days turned into 270. To go to Chu Yang's fields, Chu Yang was given a special key so that he could enter. Access there was denied. The leaf fields truly impressed Chu Yang. It was peaceful, and he found peace in this place. He already had a general idea of the place, so he decided to spend the next 50 days here alone. Chu Yang didn't want to waste any time and decided to start practicing the space spirit technique. He once again used his earring to do so, for it made cultivation more pleasant and efficient. 4 days had already passed since then, but he had spent 12 days in this space. But he hadn't gotten any result at all in learning the space spirit technique. Even the spiritual stones didn't help him in any way. He couldn't understand what the problem was after all. In the first stage of the meridian formation dimension, one could feel the chi of heaven and earth as soon as the 12 meridians were formed. In the second stage of meridian formation, one would already be able to absorb this chi into one's body. The cultivator's body was cleansed of foreign bodies, and immunity to diseases appeared. And eventually, the 24 meridians were formed. But during Chu Yang's cultivation, Chu Yang's sense of the chi of the heavens and earth had not improved at all, let alone being able to absorb it. And only now it dawned on the prince what an idiot he had been, and couldn't understand the most elementary thing. It was as if he was asking for cash payment for guarding a gold mine. He continued to berate himself for how stupid he had been. After all, the purpose of cultivating a space spirit technique was to go from sensing the chi of the heavens and earth to absorbing it. If our hero was someone else, he would have no choice but to learn step by step. But he wasn't like that. Chu Yang knew the great spiritual devouring technique, so he could just eat these spiritual stones. And it wasn't even worth mentioning that someone in the first or even third stage of measuring meridian formation could have suffered greatly from the direct consumption of spirit stones. Even cultivators of higher dimensions couldn't use the kind of direct absorption resulting from the consumption of stones, let alone fighters of the same dimension. The only thing a cultivator could achieve in the first stage of meridian formation was the sensation of the chi of heaven and earth. It was only after moving to the second one, charm, vision, taste buds, all of these sensations were greatly improved. 3 days was the time that should have been enough time to consume a single stone in the timeline. Chu Yang could consume most of the stones in the time allotted for the mission. In the timeline, about 60 days had passed. Even if Chu Yang didn't achieve tremendous cultivation results, his Assassination physiology continued to grow stronger due to the constant flow of spiritual qi. The snow had fallen very early this year. Hao and his henchmen were shaking at someone's house on their knees. No, not from the cold, but from fear. Senior Peng Shu, who was one of the best disciples of the top 10 rank, walked out to them. Hao was on his knees asking to be punished for letting his older brother down and losing the spirit stones he was supposed to give him for this month. Huang Lei had already reported everything to Peng Shu while Hao was unconscious. Therefore, Big Brother already knew about the new sect member who was one of the best disciples, and his strength was very large, so Wang Hao's defeat was obvious to Peng Shu. Hao asked to be punished, but thought again, and instead asked for another chance so he could redeem himself to his older brother. Peng Shu pondered logically. Those stones that Chu Yang had taken away, he had probably already started cultivating with them. Therefore, how could Wang Hao deal with Chu Yang? Or did he want him to beat him up once more? Peng Shu did not blame or condemn Wang Hao for this situation. However, he realized that if he did not punish him for the lost spiritual stones, he would not be able to explain it to the others. Since that was the case, he decided to hand over the responsibility of collecting spirit stones to Huang Lei. And also considering Wang Hao's injuries and how responsible he had been all these years, Peng Shu didn't want to punish him severely. He gave him another chance to rehabilitate himself. He needed to keep an eye on Chu Yang. And by the time he returned, he had to find Wang Liqie. It had already finally been 50 days. Chu Yang's mission had been successfully accomplished. Even if he didn't accomplish what he wanted to, he needed to get back to the office to complete the mission anyway. Chu Yang had joined the sect in October, so nothing was deducted from him for that month. From November until now, he had been deducted 10 points. Considering the 3 points he received for completing the mission of guarding the fields, he was left with 8 points. Also, for completing the mission, Chu Yang can choose any spirit tree within the leaf field, but with an age of up to 20 years. The prince doesn't have to decide right now, he can decide within 3 months. But after the expiration of this period, this possibility will automatically disappear. Chu Yang had a poor understanding of spirit trees, and 2 decades seemed like a rather long time. So he decided to think it over and come back later when he had made up his mind. Inside the sect, it was business as usual, training and talking about nothing. The disciples mostly preferred to talk about their previous training, as cultivation was their first priority, and there were no other worries. Chu Yang still had no friends here, but by chance he had already managed to make enemies. And he knew exactly what revenge did to people.